echoes from the ziggurat's shadow. Night descends slowly over the ancient plain, settling not with haste but with a kind of ceremonial dignity, as though even darkness understands that it is crossing the threshold of a place that remembers far more than it reveals. The ziggurat rises ahead, a stepped silhouette against the dimming horizon, each terrace holding not just stone, but centuries of inhaled and exhaled stories. Wind moves across the face of the structure with deliberate caution, brushing against brickwork baked in the fires of long-extinguished kilns. It is said that if you stand very still just after sunset, you can feel the structure's warmth dissipating into the night, like a living body surrendering heat. Those who live in the ziggurat's shadow know that the air behaves differently here. It hushes itself as it passes between the cracks, adjusting tone as if unwilling to disturb whatever rests beneath the foundation stones. And on certain nights, when the moon is a thin blade just above the horizon, the faintest tapping hums upward from the deep earth, a soft, rhythmic knock, patient and unhurried, as though some old intelligence is simply signaling its continued presence. Archaeologists often speak with confident certainty about sites like this. In standard accounts, the grand Mesopotamian ziggurats, such as the famed one at Ur, first erected under King Ur-Nammu in the 21st century BCE, served as sacred platforms, anchoring heaven and earth in symbolic unity. The great temples atop them were places of ritual, record-keeping, and celestial observation. These facts stand firm, etched into the material history of human civilization, but locals whisper of truths that do not appear in excavation reports. Truths the wind seems to echo in fragments. Elders speak of a mason who once worked on repairing the lower steps during a particularly dry season. He was a quiet man, known more for his patience than his skill, and he often worked long after others had gone home. One evening, as twilight deepened into violet dusk, he remained to smooth a fresh layer of plaster across a cracked stone. He took pride in the careful press of his trowel, in the evenness of the surface. Yet when he returned the next morning, the plaster bore a series of small indentations, shallow, circular, arranged in a neat arc across the step. At first he assumed they were the tracks of an animal, but their spacing was too regular, too intentional, and the surrounding dust held no footprints at all. He scraped the plaster away and began again. Once more, night folded over the plains. Once more he returned to find the fresh surface blemished with the same uncanny marks. He told himself it must be the effect of cooling air contracting the surface, and yet he could not shake the feeling that someone or something had pressed a curious finger into his work while the world slept. Eventually, he petitioned to be transferred to another part of the project, and to his relief, the request was granted. Still, for years afterward, he refused to walk past that step after sunset. Scholars still debate whether such stories are remnants of ancient ritual memory or simply folklore shaped by isolation and time. Some insist the tapping beneath the foundation may be explained by settling stone, echoing chambers, or the shifting of groundwater beneath the old structure. Others argue that the repeated patterns described by locals, always a short knock, followed by a longer pause match, no natural acoustic phenomenon documented in the region. In the quiet corners of academic gatherings, a few even whisper the fringe theory that the earliest builders intentionally embedded sounding chambers beneath the earth to communicate with the dead or with deities whose presence required subtle acknowledgement. Official publications rarely mention this, of course. In the nearby settlement, a small community maintains a generational practice tied to the western face of the structure. At dawn, before the first birds risk their tentative notes into the pale light, a handful of women climb a narrow, nearly hidden fissure that threads up the side of the ziggurat. They carry small offerings, barley cakes pressed with herbs, shaped by hand rather than mould. They do not bring incense or pottery. Those things, they say, are for the visible temple. These cakes, however, are meant for something deeper, something that stirs below the foundations and has no use for smoke or spectacle. The women place the offerings into a discreet alcove carved into the stone, an alcove that appears on none of the maps drawn by visiting researchers. It is not large, barely wide enough for 3 small loaves, yet locals claim it is older than the rest of the structure, an architectural inheritance from a time before the first bricks were set. They do not speak of it casually, and outsiders learn quickly not to ask too many questions. Tradition, here, is a boundary observed with respect. This quiet ritual coexists with another, stranger detail, a quirk known only to a few families whose ancestors tended the ziggurat in antiquity. Once every decade or so, a relative arrives from the outskirts carrying a small wooden box. Inside lies a sphere smooth, cool to the touch, carved of a stone that does not match the geology of the region. Each sphere is almost identical in size, as though crafted from a single lost template. One elder claims these objects once fit into a circular depression low on the ziggurat's north side, a hollow nearly invisible in dim light. According to her, the spheres were once placed there to remind the earth of its promises. She does not explain what promises. She does not need to. As we noted earlier, the locals have developed a practiced way of interacting with the ziggurat, a choreography woven from caution and familiarity. They do not fear the place. Fear is too simple a word. They regard it the way one might regard an elderly relative, revered, unpredictable, capable of profound silence and sudden murmuring. There is love, certainly, but also the understanding that old things have long memories. One of the innkeepers near the main path tells newcomers that if you listen closely at night, you can hear the ziggurat exhale. He does not mean this metaphorically. He insists the breath comes from deep within the structure, a long, slow release of air, like a sigh laden with ancient weight. Most visitors smile politely and assume this is part of the charm of local hospitality. But on their first night, when the lamps burn low and the warm hours slip toward cooler ones, many find themselves unable to dismiss a strange sensation, the distinct impression of something shifting beneath the earth's skin. A traveler once described it not as a sound but as a presence, the faint awareness of being watched by something that was neither hostile nor benevolent, simply curious. He likened it to being observed by a child standing just behind a doorway, peeking in with wide, unblinking eyes. When he awoke the next morning, he found that tiny grains of sand had gathered in a neat crescent at the foot of his bed, as though someone had traced a small arc there during the night. The women who leave cakes in the alcove say such things are not to be feared. It is merely the place reminding you that you are a visitor, one of them explained. People think they come to study the stones, but the stones study them too. The tale of the mason, the carved sphere, the tapping beneath the foundations, they all braid together into a soft but persistent awareness that the ziggurat is not merely a monument to a lost age. It is a participant in the world's ongoing narrative. It listens, it remembers, it waits. On this night, the moon hangs low, its pale curve catching on the edges of the terraces. A breeze stirs the dust at the base of the northern stair, lifting motes that glimmer faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere deep within the structure, far below where archaeologists have excavated, beneath even the oldest layers of construction, the tapping begins anew. 3 soft knocks. A pause. 2 more. A longer silence, as though awaiting acknowledgement. The night holds its breath. The plain grows still. In the inn nearby, a single candle gutters, its flame pulling sideways as though drawn by an unseen draught. The mason's old step shimmers faintly in moonlight. The circular indentation on the north side seems to darken, as if something within it stirs. A final faint knock echoes upward, delicate, deliberate, as if something very old has just noticed that someone is listening. Depths that call the forgotten. The ziggurat grows quieter as the night stretches on, but the quiet is not empty. It is textured, layered, as though silence itself holds memories like sediment. And beneath that silence, beneath the very stones that form the terraces and buttresses, lies a darkness that feels older than the structure it supports. It is said that, when the foundations were first dug, long before Ur-Nammu carved his authority into tablets, long before brick met mortar in those early architectural feats, the workers discovered a hollow space they could not explain. They filled it, of course, or they believed they did. But even now, as centuries have gathered like dust on forgotten steps, that hollow seems to breathe. Villagers often claim that the deeper you stand in the ziggurat's shadow, the stronger the pull of that unseen chamber becomes. It's not a force in the physical sense, not gravity or wind or pressure. Rather, it is a tug of awareness, a quiet nudge at the edge of perception, like being gently turned towards someone who is watching you from a dim corner. The effect is subtle in daylight, where the world is busy with commerce and routine. But at night, when the embers of the horizon cool and stars begin their slow procession, the call becomes unmistakable. Some speak of it as an invitation. Others insist it is a warning. Archaeological teams have dug deep trenches along the perimeter of the ziggurat's base, mapping layers of sediment, pottery fragments, and collapsed walls. Yet each time they approached the precise center beneath the structure, their instruments malfunctioned. Metal detectors stuttered. Compasses spun. Even the simple plumb lines swayed without any traceable breeze. One researcher jokingly called the area a polite void, as if the earth simply refused to be measured. The team laughed, documented the anomaly, and moved on. But the locals didn't laugh. They merely nodded, as though the researcher had unknowingly touched on something they had never dared articulate aloud. One fringe detail persists in whispered accounts, the claim that deep below the lowest foundation stones lies a chamber carved long before the ziggurat was ever conceived. Not a burial chamber, nor a water cistern, but something far older, cut into bedrock by hands that understood the earth in ways modern imagination cannot quite hold. Those who believe this also insist that the chamber is not empty. They speak of smooth walls, curved as though shaped by flowing water, yet resonant when struck, like the inside of a vast musical instrument. Some say the chamber hums faintly at midday, a soft vibration that can be felt through the soles of one's feet, but never heard by the ear. Scholars still debate whether such stories arise from geological shifts or collective myth-making, but the villagers speak of it with the certainty of lived experience. There is one tale, handed down like a keepsake through generations, about a boy who wandered too close to the foundation during a dry season when the wind carried dust in long, sighing gusts. He was no older than 12, curious and restless. While the adults tended fields and animals, he traced his steps along the lowest terrace, following a row of stone blocks that jutted out in uneven intervals. He paused near a groove where a missing brick left a shadowed gap. It was then that he heard it, a sound so faint it seemed to come from inside his own ribcage. A slow, deliberate knock. Not threatening, not calling his name, just knock. Then a long pause. Knock, knock. He crouched and pressed his ear to the stone. The sound came again, slightly more pronounced, as though recognizing his attention. He felt a vibration move through his jaw, through his teeth, down the side of his neck. It frightened him, but not in the way thunder or sudden movement frightens. Instead, the fear was gentle, dignified, like realizing you had accidentally entered a sacred space. When he ran home and told his grandmother, she did not scold him. She merely closed her eyes for a moment, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "It is best not to listen too closely. Some things beneath the ground like to know who notices them." This warning, though delivered softly, settled into his bones more firmly than any discipline could have. As we noted earlier, the ziggurat is treated by the local community not as an artifact, but as a living presence, something that hears, remembers, and responds. And the deep hollow beneath it seems to anchor that presence, as if the entire structure grows from a seed of ancient, deliberate silence, planted in darkness. No light has reached for millennia. In later excavations during the early 20th century, one archaeologist, a neatly dressed man who kept meticulous journals and drank mint tea every afternoon by the dig tent, recorded a strange event. It happened at dusk, as he was closing his field notes. His team had been clearing debris around a lower retaining wall, and he had wandered toward a portion of the site not yet officially mapped. As he stepped near a sunken stone, his lantern flickered violently. He thought it was the wind at first, but the air around him was still. Then the flame stretched sideways, as if pulled toward some unseen current rising from the earth below. The lantern glass rattled gently, not from force, but from a rhythmic tremor, a pulse almost. He lowered the lantern and felt a weak vibration beneath his boots. It grew slightly stronger, settling into a pattern like a heartbeat. He documented the sensation in his journal, though he noted sheepishly that he delayed writing for several days because he did not wish to seem whimsical or taken by local superstition. The entry ends quietly. I believe it was an echo, but I do not know from what. Strangely, he never returned to that exact spot, despite his usual devotion to thoroughness. The villagers, meanwhile, tell of a very old man who once claimed he could hear the earth thinking beneath the ziggurat. He was blind for most of his life, yet he walked the terraces with uncanny confidence, tapping his cane along the stones with a soft, steady rhythm. He said the ground answered him not in words, not in commands, but in subtle shifts of tone. Once, in a rare moment of openness, he confided to a traveller that the chamber beneath the ziggurat was not empty. Something rests there, he said, but it does not sleep. It remembers. When pressed about what exactly lay below, he only smiled, his clouded eyes turning toward the dark where the terraces met the earth. If it wished to be known, he murmured, we would have known it already. The traveller, unsettled, thanked him and hurried back to the village. Some fringe researchers speculate that the cavity could be a natural formation, a collapsed lava tube or ancient watercourse. But the shape, according to those who claim to have mapped its resonance, is too symmetrical, too purposeful. Circular, they insist. Perfectly circular, as though shaped by an artisan with no need for chisels or light. One fringe text even suggests that the chamber may act as a kind of resonance vault, amplifying not sound but something deeper, a vibration that binds memory to matter. The idea is fantastical, of course. Yet when the wind slips through the narrow fissures of the ziggurat, carrying a low, drawn-out sigh across the stones, one can almost believe that the earth itself is humming. Tonight, as the moon glides toward its zenith, the call from the depths grows more insistent. It is not louder, but clearer, the faint, deliberate knock rising through layers of stone, as if travelling through a long corridor carved into time itself. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. The same rhythm that echoed softly in section 1, now subtly altered, as though the presence beneath is shifting its attention, adjusting its breath. At the base of the northern wall, a small crack, one that has escaped the notice of most surveys, seems to darken, widening just a fraction as cold air breathes outward. Dust stirs at its edge, forming a delicate spiral. The air changes temperature, dropping by several degrees. A traveller passing by shivers, unaware of why. And deep below, in the chamber that no one has ever seen yet many have felt, something moves. Not quickly, not violently. Slowly, with the unhurried certainty of something that has waited far too long. A final, gentle knock rises through the stones, almost as if it expects an answer. mountains that guard, silent prophecies. Dawn does not quite reach the mountains at first. It hesitates at their jagged silhouettes, letting light gather in the crevices like water pooling in cupped hands. These peaks rise beyond the ziggurat's horizon, distant, sharp, ancient, and yet the stories told beneath them bleed seamlessly into the tales whispered in the lowlands. To the villagers near the ziggurat, the mountains are not a border but an extension of the same vast presence. A set of stone sentinels watching over promises the earth made long before people learned to carve their breath into words. Not all mountains hold prophecy, of course. Most are simply mountains, slopes of shale and granite, patient, indifferent. But here, in this remote arc of the old Mesopotamian borderlands, a certain ridge has earned quiet reverence. Travelers mention it without quite naming it. Elders gesture toward it with their whole hand rather than a finger, as if pointing too directly might summon something uninvited. And shepherds, moving their flocks along narrow trails, say their animals behave differently when the shadow of the peak passes over them, pausing, listening, then continuing with a strange, synchronized step. The peak in question is not the tallest, nor the steepest. Its power lies in its stillness. It stands apart, slightly offset from the rest of the range, almost deliberate in its solitude. Scholars who map the region note that the mountain forms a perfect alignment with the ziggurat's western flank, though they attribute this to coincidence. Yet coincidence becomes less convincing when you hear the older stories. For there is a belief, old as dust, that the builders of the ziggurat chose their site because of that mountain, that the structure's terraces mirror the rise of the peak in a kind of respectful imitation. According to one fragment of an early Akkadian hymn, the sacred step shall face the Eternal One, though interpretations differ wildly. Some say the Eternal One refers to a deity. Others propose it describes the mountain itself, which the hymn calls Mushu Shanuti, the second silence, a name that feels less like a metaphor and more like a warning. One mainstream historical detail anchors this moment in real time. Around 2250 BCE, during the Akkadian period, certain temples were indeed aligned with natural landmarks believed to house divine presence. That part is widely accepted. What is not widely accepted, or at least not widely discussed in academic halls, is the more unsettling claim preserved in oral tradition, that the mountain does not merely watch the temples, but listens to them. Scholars still debate whether the hymns describing the listening mountain were meant literally or symbolically. Yet for those who herd their animals along the mountain's base, the distinction barely matters. They speak with simple certainty. The mountain hears us, they say. Sometimes it answers. There is a peculiar detail passed down among these families, an oddity that outsiders often dismiss as mountain superstition. Every generation claims that, once in their lifetime, the mountain hums. Not loudly, not like thunder echoing through canyons. Instead, it is a deep, sustained vibration, rising through the soles of the feet and into the chest, resonating like the lowest string of an ancient lyre plucked by a patient hand. One herder recounts a story that has become part of local folklore. He was tending sheep at the base of the ridge during a dry spring, a season when the soil cracked into mosaics and the air carried the metallic scent of distant storms. As he guided his flock between two boulders, he felt the ground tremble not in the sudden jolting way of an earthquake, but in a rolling, measured pulse. He froze. The sheep froze with him. And then he heard it, a low hum rising from beneath the mountain, steady and precise. It lasted perhaps 10 heartbeats. During that span, the air seemed to thicken, as if listening more closely than before. The hum resonated through his bones, and he felt a prickling along his arms, as though invisible fingers traced old lines of meaning under his skin. He told no one at first. Not because he was frightened, but because the moment felt too intimate, too heavy with significance. It was only months later, when an elder mentioned casually that the mountain's breath had been restless this year, that he felt safe enough to share his experience. The elder nodded solemnly, as though hearing something expected. "To hear it," she said, "means it noticed you. That is neither good nor bad. It simply is." This phrase, "it simply is," repeats often in these mountains. As we noted earlier, the ziggurat's presence feels alive, attentive. Here, the mountain's presence is something deeper, more reserved, but no less aware. Where the ziggurat asks questions with gentle knocks, the mountain answers only when the world grows quiet enough to deserve it. Of course, not all stories remain grounded in the natural world. Some drift into the fringes of belief, and yet they are told with such consistency across generations that it becomes difficult to ignore them entirely. One such account describes a stone at the mountain's summit carved with symbols no one has been able to translate. Not cuneiform, not Proto-Elamite, not any script associated with known cultures of the region. The markings are slender and curved, almost serpentine. A few fringe theorists claim the symbols appear to shift over decades, as though the stone remembers each visitor and adds or erases lines accordingly. This idea is, naturally, dismissed by mainstream archaeology, though even the most reserved scholars admit that no one has catalogued the carvings consistently enough to disprove the claim. One explorer, in the 19th century, attempted to sketch the symbols. His journals still preserved in a regional archive detail, his ascent of the mountain, his careful tracing of each curved mark, and his puzzlement over the way the light seemed to bend oddly across the stone. He returned the next morning to verify his sketches and found the markings altered, subtly but unmistakably. He wrote that he felt the unnerving sensation of being corrected by the stone itself. He left the region shortly thereafter and never returned. The mountain's alignment with the ziggurat remains one of its most perplexing features. If you stand on the western terrace just before dawn, at the exact moment when the sky shifts from indigo to the faintest silver, the first beam of sunlight passes through the ridge's highest notch and lands directly on a single stone at the ziggurat's center. This stone is unremarkable in appearance, worn by time, chipped at the edges. Yet each year, on the same day, at the same angle, the sunlight finds it with an almost ceremonial precision. Some say the light is an annual reminder. Others say it is a message, meant to be understood only when humanity grows quiet enough to listen again. And then there is the strangest tale of all, the one most often whispered at night when fires burn low. It is said that once every few centuries, the mountain's shadow does not behave as a shadow should. One winter, long ago, when snow lay heavy on the peaks, a traveller claimed the shadow stretched farther than possible, reaching across the plain in a long, dark ribbon. It touched the base of the ziggurat, and in that moment, according to the tale, the faint knock beneath the terraces went silent, completely silent, not paused, not softened, silenced, as if something below were suddenly listening as well. The silence lasted until the shadow receded at sunset. No one has been able to verify this. Scholars debate whether the phenomenon could be an optical illusion, an atmospheric trick, or simply a story born from an unusually long twilight. Yet the villagers speak of the event with steady voices. They believe the mountain and the ziggurat share something, not communication exactly, but recognition. Tonight, as the stars loosen themselves from the sky and gather in quiet clusters above the peaks, a thin mist drifts through the mountain passes. It catches on unseen currents, curling around a ledge here, a boulder there, almost as if guided. And though the night is calm, a soft tremor rolls beneath the ridge, faint, precise, lasting only a moment. On the plain below, the ziggurat answers with a single, delicate knock. A conversation, perhaps? A reminder? a warning, a prophecy stirred awake in the dark, tombs that whisper eternal rest. The mountains shrink behind us as the land stretches into a slow-rolling quiet, and in that quiet lie tombs older than any carved stone above ground. They rest beneath low ridges and gentle mounds, places where the earth rises only slightly, as though reluctant to reveal what sleeps beneath. These tombs do not announce themselves like monuments or temples. They keep their dignity in silence. And yet, as we move deeper into their presence, the air thickens with a sensation that is neither dread nor welcome, something more like recognition. The ancients of this region practiced burial with a certain softness. Bodies were placed in clay-lined chambers, limbs curled as if returning to a fetal posture, surrounded by small tokens, the faint sheen of a copper amulet, a doll of woven reeds, a shard of obsidian polished for reasons now forgotten. Even in death, they prepared for a long and gentle rest. But the tombs we approach tonight are of an older kind, the kind that seem to breathe when the wind dies, the kind whose entrances never fully close. The first whisper reaches us like a draught, slipping through cracked stone. Not a voice, not words, more like a faint exhalation shaped by narrow corridors that run beneath the mound like veins. The sensation is familiar, in a way the same subtle attention felt beneath the ziggurat's foundations, now echoed in a different register, as if the dead were listening rather than knocking. One mainstream historical detail anchors us here. In the late 3rd millennium BCE, during the height of the Sumerian city-states, royal tombs at Ur revealed elaborate burial practices, with chambers lined in bitumen and grave goods arranged in ceremonial symmetries. These discoveries remain some of the most striking windows into ancient life and belief. But the tombs before us are not royal, and they are not of Ur. These belong to a culture so early that its name does not survive a people who built small, hidden resting places rather than grand displays of lineage and power. And yet, the quiet inside these tombs carries its own authority. Local shepherds claim that, on warm nights when the wind drops away, you can hear soft murmurs rising from the mounds. Not mourning, they say, not sorrow, but the murmur of memory, the sensation of stories moving through the stone like slow water. One shepherd swore he heard two tones intertwined, a high, trembling cadence followed by a deeper, steadying hum, like a lullaby sung by someone who did not need breath. He refused to pass that way for years afterward. There is a fringe detail, often overlooked because it sounds like myth, the belief that the tombs once shifted their positions over generations. Not by much, only by the breadth of a hand or the width of a shadow, but enough that elders marked the ground around them with lines of carved stones, never trusting the earth to hold still. Scholars dismiss this as erosion, soil creep, or inaccurate memory. But one old woman insisted she saw a mound change shape overnight after a season of relentless rain, like a sleeper turning over after a long dream. She said this without drama, without fear, as though such things were simply part of the world's rhythm. Scholars still debate whether these stories reflect genuine cultural memory of geological shifts, or whether they hint at something older, a belief that the dead were not entirely done with their movements beneath the earth. The debate remains politely unresolved. As we move closer, the air cools in soft, steady degrees, as though slipping into a subterranean breath. The entrance to the first tomb is modest, a small opening framed by stones smoothed by centuries. The threshold feels expectant, not ominous. There is a sense that whoever rests inside has been waiting patiently, not for visitors, but for attention. Inside, the chamber opens like a half-forgotten story. Clay walls curve inward, shaped lovingly by hands long gone. In the center lies a hollow where a body once rested, though the remains have long since dissolved back into dust. Only a few objects remain: a chipped bowl, a carved bead of bone, and a strange disk of fired clay, etched with symbols so faint they seem to withdraw when examined too closely. The symbols are not cuneiform, nor are they pictographs. They resemble spirals, nested within one another like ripples frozen mid-motion. An archaeologist once attempted to trace these designs by lamplight. His notes describe the strange sensation that the spirals pulled the eye inward, almost hypnotic in their looped precision. He recorded that his fingertips tingled when he touched the clay, not in pain, but in a warm, vibrating pulse. He abandoned the study the next morning, claiming he had dreamed of sinking into a pool of spirals that led to a chamber beneath the chamber, a subtle hollow he could not find upon waking. The disc still lies where he left it. It is difficult to tell whether the sweeping hush in the chamber is an absence of sound or the presence of something too subtle to interpret. As we breathe the cool air, faint patterns dance at the edges of perception. Not quite whispers, but not quite silence. More like a careful unspooling of memory. As we noted earlier, the ziggurats seem to question, knocking softly, probing the limits of our attention. Here, in this hollow, the inquiry feels reversed. The tomb is not asking. It is remembering, observing, cataloguing impressions as quietly as dust settling on clay. Some locals refuse to step inside these chambers. They say the dead prefer to rest in undisturbed solitude, and entering their space without invitation carries consequences not of danger, but of uneasy dreams that linger for weeks, voices that echo just before sleep, footsteps that follow you only to stop when you turn. A few, however, enter with reverence. These are usually older women who carry a single item, a reed lamp with a tiny ember glowing inside. They place the lamp just inside the tomb's threshold, bow their heads, and retreat without a word. The gesture is a quiet acknowledgement, an assurance to the dead that they have not been forgotten, even if their names have dissolved into earth and wind. A peculiar tradition accompanies these offerings. Those who leave lamps must not look back at the tomb as they walk away. To do so, they say, is to invite the memory of the dead into your eyes, where it might linger too long. Tonight, as the last ember of sunlight fades from the horizon, the ground seems to hum faintly beneath the mound. The vibration feels different from the knocks beneath the ziggurat, smoother, slower, almost like a long exhale. The spiral disc glints faintly, as though the curves are catching more light than the chamber offers. At the doorway, a subtle breeze slips past us, though no wind stirs outside. The tomb's hush deepens, curling around the stones with gentle certainty. It feels less like the past and more like the boundary between past and present thinning, almost imperceptibly. And from somewhere deep within the mound, perhaps from a chamber, no one has yet reached a small, deliberate sound rises. Not a knock, something softer, a whisper-shaped breath, as though the earth itself has started to speak. Dunes that hide nomads lament. The tombs recede behind us, their whispered memories folding back into the soil, and the land begins to change. The ground loses its firmness. Grasses thin, then vanish. And soon, the earth exhales into an expanse of dunes, long, slow drifts of sand that shift in ripples like the surface of a sleeping sea. Here, the world becomes quiet in a new way. The wind shapes everything. The curves of the dunes, the faint trails left by beetles, even the echoes of distant stories carried across the desert like soft, wandering ghosts. These dunes are not empty. They hold centuries of human movement, the migrations of nomads who crossed this desert long before the first bricks of the ziggurat were laid. They followed the stars, the shifting wells of seasonal water, and the deep instinct of survival carved into generations. Their lives left few physical traces, no temples, no walls, no monuments. Only fragments, small tokens swallowed slowly by drifting sand. But the wind remembers them, and sometimes, at dusk, when the air cools too quickly, their memory sighs across the desert in a way that feels almost like lament. A mainstream historical detail anchors us. During the second millennium BCE, extensive nomadic networks moved across the Near Eastern deserts, linking trade routes from the Levant to the plains of southern Mesopotamia. These tribes carried stories, songs, and instruments, memory wrapped in mobility. But the land we step into now holds tribes even older, tribes whose names are gone, but whose presence rattles faintly in each shifting grain. Local tradition speaks of a wandering people called, in the soft cadence of regional dialect, the Almahir, those who walk between breaths. Whether they truly existed or are an amalgam of forgotten tribes, no one can say. Their legend persists because of a peculiar phenomenon. The desert wind occasionally carries a sound that resembles singing. Not loud, not melodic in any familiar scale, but a thin, trembling line of notes that rise and fall with uncanny regularity. Travelers swear that the dunes hum under certain moons, as if remembering a chant long since abandoned by human tongues. Some scholars still debate whether this phenomena is caused by singing sand, a well-documented acoustic event where specific grain sizes produce eerie tones as they slip downslope. But the pattern of the sound here does not match any recorded acoustic dune. The rhythm repeats with strange precision, 8 tones, a pause, then 5 tones lower, always at dusk. Always when the wind shifts from east to north. It is not nature imitating humans, the villagers say. It is the desert remembering its singers. There is an old tale attached to this desert's lament, one told with particular reverence. It begins with a caravan of herders who crossed the dunes during a harsh, dry season. Water was scarce, and the air smelled of heated metal. As they moved their camels along a narrow ridge, a low moan rose from beneath the sand. At first they thought it was a trick of wind funneling between the slopes, but then they realized the sound carried a distinct rhythm, slow, low, pulsed with breath. Their lead scout dismounted, pressing his ear to the dune's side. He waited, and then it came again, a clear, deliberate tone, impossible to dismiss as wind. He described it later as a voice buried under the world. What makes the account stranger is what followed. The sand beneath the scout's hand began to tremble, not violently, not like an earthquake, but with a kind of patient shivering, as if something beneath the dune was shifting its attention. He pulled back quickly, his heart racing. The caravan moved on in silence, leaving no offerings, no mark, no investigation. Only the memory of a dune that had hummed like something alive. Decades later, the same scout now, an old man with a voice weathered by years of sun and sand, told his grandson that the voice he heard that day was not calling to him. It was calling to itself, he said, like a memory waking up. This idea that the dunes hold their own memories permeates nomadic folklore. During the long nights of travel, when fires are small and the sky brims with cold stars, elders warn the young not to wander far from camp. The dunes keep company with the restless, they say, and the restless are easily mistaken for their own echoes. The wind shifts then, as if demonstrating. A soft, looping sound curls across the sand like a breath caught on the edge of a song. It doesn't frighten. It simply lingers, enigmatic and deliberate, as though the desert itself is practicing a memory. One fringe detail insists that beneath certain dunes lie ancient burial pits, not tombs like those in the hills, but wide earthen cavities where nomadic clans placed their dead in the embrace of shifting sand. Without stone markers or sealed chambers, these graves became fluid, merging with the movements of the desert. Some say the dunes themselves are shaped by these buried presences, rising and falling with the weight of memory. Archaeologists, of course, dispute this. No excavations have reliably confirmed such pits, and shifting sands make long-term analysis nearly impossible. Yet there are stories too many to dismiss entirely, of travelers hearing faint breathing sounds near the base of these dunes. One account tells of a researcher who, while mapping dune migration patterns, placed her seismograph stakes too close to a steep slope. The readings captured a consistent, rhythmic vibration from below, one that did not match wind, sand flow, or any known subsurface activity in the region. She dismissed it as instrument error, but later admitted privately that the pattern felt biological. As we move deeper into the dunes, the sky opens above us, vast and pale in its fading light. The horizon becomes a soft blur of amber and rose. Shadows stretch long across the sand, forming lines that resemble script. For a moment it feels as though the desert itself is writing something, a message, half hidden in motion. As we noted earlier in the tombs, memory here is not silent. It moves, it breathes, and now, in the desert, it sings. In the heart of the dune field lies a place the nomads call Rahil's Fold, a crescent-shaped depression where the wind consistently travels in looping currents. Every tribe that crosses this region has some version of the same warning: do not sleep there. The wind is too talkative, too attentive. Animals avoid it. Fires burn strangely within it, flickering sideways as though reaching towards something unseen. One particularly old tale tells of a traveller who ignored the warnings, seeking shelter from a sudden sandstorm. He entered Rahil's Fold just as the first gusts churned the sand. He dug himself a shallow pit and covered his head with cloth, waiting for the storm to pass. But as the wind screamed overhead, he heard another sound, a low melodic voice humming beneath the raging storm. He described it later as soft chant, rising like heat from the ground. When the storm passed, he emerged shaken. Around the edge of the fold, delicate patterns had appeared in the sand spirals, interconnected lines, shapes that resembled handprints pressed by someone with fingers too long and too slender to be human. He left the desert after that, moved north, lived quietly near the mountains. But he never forgot the chant beneath the sand. Tonight, the dunes feel restless, not dangerous, but watchful. A breeze curls along their ridges, carrying a faint, wavering tone that seems to harmonize with the whispers we heard in the tombs. The desert is speaking in its own vocabulary, long-held memories unwinding across sand grains that have traveled farther than any human lineage. Then, as the first stars prick the darkening sky, a soft tremor rolls beneath our feet. A hum rises low, steady, unmistakably patterned. 8 tones. A pause. 5 tones lower. The same pattern. The dunes exhale a long, shimmering sigh. And somewhere beneath Rahil's Fold, a voice shaped from sand and memory stirs, not calling to us, but noticing that we have wandered close enough to hear. Plateaus, where spirits linger. Beyond the dunes, where the desert's long sigh softens into stillness, the land rises gently, and then holds steady, broad, deliberate. Here lie the plateaus, quiet, wind-brushed expanses of stone and scrub, spread out like vast tables where the world sets down its older memories to rest. The slopes leading upward are mild, almost courteous, but once you stand atop the first plateau, the air changes. Sound travels strangely. Footsteps land more softly than expected. And conversations, even whispered ones, seem to drift farther than the words themselves should allow. Locals say it's because spirits pass easily across flat spaces. They don't mean it ominously. To them, a spirit is not a ghost, but a residue of lived life memories still wandering, not ready to settle. And the plateaus, with their wide horizons and thin winds, offer the perfect stage for such remnants to drift without interruption. The first plateau is modest, a long ribbon of stone dotted with sagebrush and pale grass. But the second plateau, rising just beyond it, is stranger. Those who graze their herds there speak of places where the ground hums faintly, like an old instrument plucked by unseen hands. Not music, exactly more the soft vibration of memory traveling through stone. A mainstream historical note grounds us. During the 13th century BCE, this region of the Near Eastern highlands saw transient settlements of pastoralist tribes who moved with the seasons. They left behind hearth rings, stone alignments, and, in some places, curious patterns of cairns that do not match any known burial practice. But these plateaus hold something older, still traces of a culture that left little evidence except for the unsettling way the air behaves. One herder recounts a story passed through his family for generations. His ancestor, tending goats near the plateau's center, once heard laughter light, distant, unmistakably human, carried across the flat expanse. But he was alone. His goats were grazing quietly, and no other herders were within sight. The laughter drifted past him in a gentle arc, fading as though someone had walked behind him at a leisurely pace. When he turned, the air was still. He returned home early that day, silent and introspective. Asked later why he seemed troubled, he replied, "It was not the sound that frightened me, it was the way it moved." Scholars still debate whether such tales reflect acoustic oddities plateaus can create peculiar echo patterns, or whether these stories preserve traces of ritual sites once used for gatherings, chanting, or storytelling. But the tone in the villagers' voices suggests they believe something more intentional lingers here. One fringe detail stands out among these traditions: the belief that the plateaus shift emotions, not wildly, not uncontrollably, but subtly. Travelers describe sudden waves of calm, of sadness, of inexplicable nostalgia, washing over them at particular spots. One explorer wrote that while standing near a weathered stone circle on the second plateau, he felt a great longing for an event that had never happened, a memory not mine. He stood for nearly half an hour before the sensation drifted away, leaving him strangely lightened, as though some unseen burden had been removed. Others tell of shadows behaving unusually on the plateau. At midday, when the sun is directly overhead, shadows shrink to tight clusters beneath feet and stones. Yet in certain parts of the plateau, shadows seem slightly off-center, as though the ground is tilting in a direction the eye cannot detect. One traveler claimed his shadow elongated briefly at noon, impossible, yet undeniable in his memory, forming a thin silhouette that stretched toward a rock ledge 50 paces away. He did not stay long after that. As we noted earlier in the dunes and tombs, memory here behaves like a living presence, wandering, humming, reshaping itself over time. On the plateaus, that presence feels unburdened, free to drift where it pleases, and the plateau's openness invites it. Near the northern ridge of the second plateau stands a curious formation, a cluster of stones arranged in a near-perfect circle. The stones are not carved, yet each bears a smooth, polished face on the inward side, as though worn down by centuries of touch. Locals call this circle the waiting ring, though no one agrees on what, exactly, it waits for. Some elders insist it was once a place of council, where tribal leaders gathered under starlight to make decisions for the seasons ahead. Others maintain it was a resting place for travelers who carried songs from distant lands. One legend suggests it was meant as a meeting place between the living and those who had recently passed a soft boundary where farewells could be whispered into the wind. Yet there is a lesser-known tale rarely told, except among older families, that the waiting ring is where spirits gather when the world grows too still. They come not to haunt, but to remember, to practice the shape of their former voices, to walk, slowly and silently, the paths they once knew. A strange event recorded by a 1,932 surveyor adds an eerie layer to this legend. While mapping the plateau at dawn, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, measured, and entirely human in cadence. Thinking he had stumbled upon another member of the team, he turned with a greeting ready. but the plateau was empty. Only the soft wind moved across the stones. What unsettled him more was the sound that followed, a faint exhale, close enough to move the hair on the back of his neck. He described it in his report as a sigh of recognition, though he never clarified what he meant by that. The report ends abruptly. He left the region 2 days later, refusing to return for further survey work. The people who tend these lands insist the spirits here are neither hostile nor lost. They are simply lingering. The plateau holds what the world forgets, one elderly woman explained. When minds can no longer carry certain memories, the land does it for us. Some evenings, when the wind is steady and the sky glows with the soft red of late sunset, she claims you can hear fragments of ancient speech syllables carried lightly across the plateau. Not clear, not language as we know it, but the cadence of conversation, the rising and falling tones of people long gone. Sometimes the wind seems to pause, as if waiting for a reply. Tonight, as the first stars appear in the narrowing sky, the plateau holds an unusual stillness. The breeze softens, then stops. A faint hum rises from the stones, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat fading in and out of perception. The polished stones of the waiting ring catch the dim light, reflecting faint, shifting glimmers that seem to move between them. And then, from the center of the ring, a soft sound emerges. Not singing, not footsteps. A quiet inhale, long and patient, as if something has just woken from a peaceful, very old memory and is now listening for what comes next. Rivers that conceal forgotten rites. The plateau releases us gently, like a long-held breath, and the land slopes downward once more. Stone gives way to soil, soil gives way to reed beds, and soon the sound of water begins to thread through the air. It is a soft, steady murmur, ancient, unhurried, the kind of sound that seems to remember its own origin. Here flows the river that locals call the Listener, though its official name on maps is far more mundane. The Listener moves with a certainty that feels older than the civilizations that once flourished along its banks. It cuts through the land in deliberate curves, as though tracing pathways long forgotten by memory, but never abandoned by time. Where the dunes held lament and the plateau's lingering spirits, the river carries its own moods. It is never loud, never raging. Instead, it behaves like a keeper of quiet rituals, its surface calm even when wind stirs the reeds. Those who live along its edge say the river has always been cautious, as if protective of something held beneath its surface. We approach a bend where the water widens into a slow, glassy pool. The reeds here grow thick and tall, swaying gently though the air is nearly still. A faint tension curls along the riverbank, not sinister, but attentive, like the hush before a ceremony begins. A mainstream historical truth grounds our presence. In the early 2nd millennium BCE, numerous riverine communities in Mesopotamia practiced water burials and votive depositions. Small offerings, beads, fish-shaped amulets, clay figurines were placed into rivers as gifts to deities believed to dwell between currents. Some offerings were meant to protect travelers. Others carried personal prayers or pleas for healing. But along this river, something older shaped the rites, something that predates the cultures recorded in clay and stone. Local tradition insists that beneath the Listener's surface lie carved stones arranged in spirals, not visible from above, not reachable in dry season, but felt by fishermen who lower nets into deeper channels. They say the nets sometimes snag on smooth shapes that are neither rock nor wood nor bone. When pulled, the nets go slack, as though the shapes simply let go, uninterested in being found. One elder describes these underwater spirals as the old steps of a forgotten dance. Another claims they shift slightly every few decades, nudged by the river itself. Scholars still debate whether these tales point to submerged ruins carried downstream over centuries, or if they exaggerate natural formations carved by currents. Yet divers sent to explore the area report unusual phenomena: compasses that spin, lights that dim, and a sense impossible to articulate of being watched from beneath the water. There is one particularly intriguing fringe detail that refuses to fade from local memory. It is said that once every generation, during the river's lowest ebb, a set of carved stones emerges briefly along the shallows. They bear symbols arranged in concentric circles, lines that some elders compare to the spirals found in the ancient tombs far from here. A kind of echo, perhaps, across time and terrain, but the most unsettling tale concerns the rites once performed along this river, rituals whispered in the calmest tones, as though retelling them too loudly might stir something beneath the water. According to legend, the earliest inhabitants practiced a ceremony at certain bends of the Listener, always at dusk, always in silence. They would gather reeds, knot them into braided loops, and place them onto the surface of the water. If the loops drifted downstream in a straight line, the river accepted the offering. But if the loops spun in place or drifted back toward shore, it meant the river was displeased, or worse, that it remembered something the people preferred to forget. One such story describes a young woman who placed her woven loop into the water at dusk. Instead of drifting downstream, the loop turned sharply sideways, then slowly rotated, as though caught on an invisible pivot. She watched in confusion as the reeds began to unravel, not from current, but from the inside outward, as if a careful hand had teased the knots loose beneath the surface. She ran home without finishing the rite. The next morning, she found spirals traced in the mud outside her hut, delicate, precise, the size of her own hand. Her family moved away soon after. Some say the spirals follow her lineage to this day. As we noted earlier, each landscape we've crossed, the tombs, the dunes, the plateaus, carries memory in a different form. The river holds memory most fluidly, passing it from bend to bend, weaving stories into the very silt that settles at the bottom. But beneath the listener's gentleness lies something more deliberate, more watchful. Near the center of the region lies the place villagers avoid at night, a narrow inlet called the Quiet Reach. During the day, the water is perfectly still, with clarity so sharp you can see pebbles resting beneath. But at night, the surface darkens, reflecting nothing, not sky, not stars, not lantern light. Those who have approached it after dusk describe an eerie sensation of depth. Not physical depth, but a feeling as though the water is not just reflecting darkness, but holding it. Fishermen avoid casting nets there. They say the river does not like to be disturbed at the reach. One old fisherman recounted a moment from his youth when, disobeying his father, he cast a small net after sunset. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the net jerked downward with such force that the line snapped instantly. He insisted later that he felt not through the rope, but through the air around him, a deep, slow pulse rising from the water, a pulse that resembled a heartbeat. He never fished the reach again. Rarer still is the tale of the woman who lived alone near the Quiet Reach, a healer, known for treating fevers with river reeds steeped in special infusions. She claimed to hear voices beneath the water, not clear voices, not words, more like the murmur of many tones layered into one continuous hum. She said the river was full of voices of the past, woven together so tightly that they became indistinguishable. One evening she walked to the reach at dusk and did not return. They found her satchel on the bank, herbs still bundled neatly inside. Her footprints ended a few inches from the water's edge. No other marks disturbed the mud. The river was silent for 3 days. Afterward, an unnatural stillness that old men still recall with unease. Yet for all these unsettling stories, the listener is not feared. It is respected, approached with the same care one gives to a sleeping elder. The river remembers, that much is certain, but it also forgives, offering clean water, fertile banks, and safe passage to those who treat it with understanding. Tonight, as moonlight slips across its surface in long silver ribbons, the river appears peaceful. Reeds sway gently. A frog calls from the far shore, and yet something stirs far below, a slow, almost rhythmic tremor that travels upward in tiny pulses. The water near the quiet reach darkens slightly, forming a faint spiral of movement. A soft vibration rises through the mud beneath our feet, and then, barely there, a sound emerges from the depths, not a whisper, not a chant, a low, contemplative hum, as if the river is listening and has just heard something worth answering. Scrolls that burn in silence. The river's hum follows us for a while, brushing at our steps like a trailing reed, but the land soon shifts again. The banks narrow into stone, the reeds thin, and the winding path rises onto harder ground. Here the air feels different, drier, sharper, carrying the faint scent of old papyrus and dust that has not moved in centuries. It is the smell of memory arranged in careful lines, of knowledge pressed into fragile sheets. This is the region where scrolls once lived. The ruins that greet us are not grand. They were never meant to impress. They were built for quiet minds, for hands that etched ideas into clay, for scribes who bent over low tables until their backs shaped into permanent question marks. What remains now are fragments of walls, half-buried foundations, and a collapsed arch that once guarded a small library. Locals call this place the Silent Archive, not because it is quiet, but because of what happened here. The air carries an expectant stillness, as though each stone holds a memory it refuses to release. Even the wind, usually eager to scatter dust, moves respectfully, stirring the air without disturbing the ground. For those who approach with enough patience, the silence holds more weight than the ruins themselves. A mainstream historical truth steadies our step. In several Near Eastern settlements during the Late Bronze Age, small community archives held records, tax ledgers, ritual calendars, medicinal notes, and the occasional poem. These were not grand libraries like those later in Alexandria or Nineveh. They were intimate, practical spaces. But the Silent Archive did not function like any of those. It belonged to a sect of scribes known only through 3 surviving references on clay tablets found miles away, the Keepers of Ash and Breath. Their name alone hints at something unusual. According to one tablet, the Keepers believed certain knowledge was too fragile to carry in ink. Instead, they divided their work between what was written and what was burned. Not burned to destroy it, burned to release it. They taught that some ideas were meant to rise in smoke, woven into air and breath, absorbed by the world rather than preserved in clay. What remains here is only the written half of their teachings, and even that is sparse. For the other half, the half that moved like flame, has vanished. Scholars still debate whether the keepers practiced a form of ritualized forgetting, or whether they genuinely believed the world around them could hold memory better than physical text. A few fringe historians argue that certain chants or rites were encoded in the smoke of burning scrolls, not in words, but in patterns that flickered briefly against the air, meant to be perceived without fully understanding. Most dismiss this as poetic metaphor. But the villagers who live near the ruins speak of a night long remembered, a night when the library burned without sound. It is said to have happened during an unusually cold season, sky clear, air brittle. A shepherd passing by saw a faint orange glow through the high windows and assumed thieves had lit a fire inside for warmth. But as he approached, he realized the flames were too still. They did not lick upward or cast shadows. They rose in quiet, steady columns, like lanterns placed behind glass. The strangest part was the silence. No crackling of papyrus, no groaning beams, no collapsing walls, just the soft glow of rising fire. By the time villagers arrived, the entire archive was lit from within by silent flame. The papyrus scrolls inside dozens, perhaps hundreds, were burning without consuming. Flames poured from their surfaces like fine strands of silk, rising into the cold air and vanishing before they reached the ceiling. No smoke, no heat, only light. One woman reached toward a scroll in astonishment. Her husband pulled her back, fearing the fire would scorch her skin, but she insisted the air near the scroll was cool. Others soon confirmed it. The flames gave off no warmth whatsoever. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the light dimmed. Scroll after scroll darkened, curling softly in on themselves, whispering into embers without ever making a sound. When the fire passed, all that remained was ash, soft, fine, gathered in neat spirals as though placed by a careful hand. The villagers stood together in the ruin, shaken not by the destruction but by the quiet. Something about the event felt intentional, ceremonial, as though the library had decided its time was done. A vagabond scholar visiting the region decades later collected stories of the incident. He described in his notes a curious detail. The ash left behind was not normal. When touched, it dissolved instantly into the air, leaving fingertips cold, as though touched by shadow rather than soot. He attempted to gather samples for analysis, but each time the ash dissolved before he reached his satchel. Eventually, he abandoned the attempt. Yet what disturbed him most was a fringe account by an elderly scribe who claimed the burning was not destruction, but release. According to the old woman, the keepers of ash and breath had always taught that, when knowledge grows too heavy for the page must be lightened. She believed the archive had reached such a moment that its teachings, stored too long in fragile form, needed to return to the world in smoke. "I do not think the fire failed to burn," she said. "I think the knowledge finished its work." Her voice was calm, certain. As we noted earlier in the dunes and river, memory here is not passive. It reshapes itself. It travels. On the plateaus it lingered in the air. In the dunes it hummed beneath sand. In the river it drifted in currents. Here, on the foundation stones of the silent archive, memory transforms itself, shifting from written form into something less tangible, more deliberate. There is one last tale tied to these ruins, whispered only when nights stretch long and moonlight turns pale enough to resemble old parchment. They say that once every few decades, when the air is still and cold, a faint glow rises from the ruined floor. Ash gathers in soft spirals. The scent of ink, sharp, metallic, unmistakable, drifts through the space. And if one stands within the circle of broken walls long enough, words begin to form in the silence. Not spoken words, not written words, just the impression of meaning, like a thought that is not yours drifting quietly through your mind. Tonight, the ruins feel restless. A breeze stirs, but moves around us rather than through. The air cools. A faint shimmer flickers between two fallen pillars, too soft to call light, too deliberate to be dust. A thin spiral of ash rises from the ground, appearing where no ash was a heartbeat before. It curls upward, silently, steadily, and as it dissolves into the air, a single weightless impression drifts toward us. A thought not our own, a memory bending itself into form, as though the silent archive has noticed our arrival and decided to speak again. Canopies that veil jaguar secrets. The silent archive fades behind us, as though exhaling its last drifting whisper, and the land begins to thicken. Soil grows darker, air grows heavier. Trees gather first in small clusters, then in knots, then in sweeping arches that knit together into a forest canopy dense enough to turn daylight into a muted green dusk. The shift is subtle at first, a deeper hue to the leaves, a richer scent on the breeze, but soon the forest claims the horizon entirely. It is a different world beneath these branches, one ruled not by wind or stone, but by watching eyes. The canopy overhead is layered like woven cloth. Sunlight filters through in narrow shafts, thin as blades and just as sharp. Somewhere above, creatures move small, nimble, rustling through leaves with intention. But it is the quiet beneath the rustling that holds the forest's deeper stories. Here, the air seems to hesitate before moving, as though aware it must pass through an older order of things. Locals call this place Jaguar's Vale, though jaguars no longer roam here, or so people claim. The forest's history is difficult to untangle. Some believe it served as the meeting ground of an early tribe whose rituals blended seamlessly with the animal world. Others insist the forest's deeper layers conceal remnants of a vanished culture older than any found in written records. Archaeologists have uncovered shards of pottery, bones carved with swirling patterns, and a single stone figurine of a crouching feline with eyes that seem to follow the observer. A mainstream historical detail anchors the region. In parts of ancient Mesoamerica, especially in pre-Olmec cultures, jaguar symbolism dominated ritual life. Masks, carvings, and motifs all pointed to a belief that the jaguar was a doorway between worlds, a creature able to slip effortlessly between night and day, life and death, waking and dreaming. But this forest lies far from those ancient centers, in a land without pyramids or plazas. And yet the jaguar's shadow lingers here, woven through stories whispered by those who gather forest herbs or hunt small game in the twilight. They claim the canopy watches, not metaphorically, not symbolically, watches. There is a fringe detail repeated across generations. Under certain moons, thin crescents just beginning to fatten the forest produces a strange sound. Not a growl, not a cry. A soft chuffing rhythm, like a large cat exhaling through closed lips. Hunters swear the sound follows them at a steady distance, never closer, never further, pacing them through the undergrowth. When they stop, the sound stops. When they move, it resumes. And though no one sees a jaguar here anymore, everyone knows what the chuffing means. A jaguar acknowledges your presence, or something wearing a jaguar's memory does. We enter deeper, following an animal path worn smooth by years of quiet passage. The canopy thickens overhead, shutting out the last suggestion of open sky. Light grows thinner, diffused into a gentle emerald glow that shifts with each breath of wind. Beneath it, the forest floor pulses with life. Beetles skittering over roots, frogs croaking their hollow songs, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of the earth adjusting to our footsteps. At the heart of the forest lies a place locals refuse to enter, the hollow of painted leaves. They say the leaves here bear markings, stains of deep amber and charcoal patterns that resemble jaguar spots. Yet these markings appear only on leaves in that single clearing. Nowhere else. More unsettling still, when the leaves fall and decay, the same markings appear on the new leaves that replace them. Scholars still debate whether the phenomenon is caused by a fungal pattern, a mineral uptake from underground water, or something else entirely. Samples taken by a botanist decades ago showed nothing unusual. No excess pigment, no spores, no environmental anomaly. Yet her field notes contained a single scribbled line in the margin. The trees are aware of each other. She never published the research. As we move toward the hollow, the forest begins to change. The underbrush quiets. Insects pause. Even the birds fall silent. The air thickens, as if holding its breath. Shadows deepen beneath the roots, pooling in small pockets that tremble as though resisting the faintest tremor. We step into the clearing. The leaves above glow with dappled patterns, each marking distinct yet unified, forming a tapestry of speckled light that ripples as branches sway. It feels as though the canopy is alive, with eyes not staring exactly, but observing with calm, patient intelligence. An old story whispers forward as naturally as wind through branches. Long ago, a nomadic healer entered this forest, seeking a rare plant said to grow only in the hollow. She vanished for 3 days. When she returned, she carried no herbs, no satchel, no tools, only a single tale. She had seen a jaguar made of shadows, its outline marked by shifting patterns of light and leaf. It paced her at the edge of the clearing, never touching the ground, its body rippling like smoke. When she bowed her head, the creature mirrored her, lowering itself slowly, deliberately, as though honoring a ritual forgotten by human memory. She left the forest that day and never returned. The villagers claim she died with a jaguar's cry on her lips, soft, trembling, unmistakable. There is another account, more recent. A hunter from a nearby region claims he spent a night trapped in the forest after losing his path during a storm. He took refuge beneath a wide-rooted tree, listening to the rain thrum against the canopy. Sometime after midnight, he heard soft footsteps circling him, padding gently, never approaching. He felt something warm brush the back of his neck, like breath. And though he saw nothing in the darkness, he sensed a presence settling beside him, returning warmth in rhythm with his shivering breaths. He slept, oddly comforted. At dawn, he awoke alone beneath the tree. The earth beside him bore a faint impression in the soil, not a paw print, but the shape of a body curled gently, as though a large creature had rested beside him. He left offerings at the forest edge every season after that. As we noted earlier in the plains and tombs, memory shifts its shape according to the land. Here, beneath the canopy, memory takes an animal form, stalking silently, observing carefully. It is not a threat, it is not a guardian, it simply is. A remnant of a time when humans and the forest recognized each other without words. The hollow deepens around us. Leaves rustle above in soft waves that do not match the wind. Something moves between the branches, a shape that is not shape, a ripple in the dim. We feel watched, not unkindly, but with focus. A faint chuffing sound drifts from somewhere behind us, soft and measured. We turn. Nothing moves. Yet the air around us vibrates with presence, warm, aware, deliberate. Then, from the far side of the clearing, a shadow slips between trees. Not seen directly, but sensed a subtle distortion in the dappled light, as though the patterns themselves bend around something passing. Leaves tremble. A branch lowers slightly, as though weighted by a creature far too light to break it. The forest inhales. And somewhere deep in the canopy, a single, low chuff answers. A greeting, or a warning, or perhaps for the first time, an invitation. Waves that guard, sunken idols. The canopy thins as though exhaling us from its watchful green, and the land begins its slow descent toward the distant shimmer of water. The air changes gradually, first a faint coolness, then the unmistakable breath of mist drifting in from the shore. And soon the trees give way entirely, replaced by sand mixed with riverstone, until at last the world opens to the sea. It is not a roaring ocean, not a crashing, violent shoreline. This sea whispers. Small, precise waves lap the edges of the land with the careful rhythm of someone turning pages in an ancient book. The water holds a deep shade of slate blue, dark even at midday, and its surface reflects the sky as though selectively choosing which pieces of light to keep and which to swallow whole. Locals call it the listening sea, believing that it hears more than it speaks, and beneath its quiet surface lie shapes no one wishes to disturb. The horizon is calm, too calm. Not the calm of peace, but the calm of something waiting. A row of dark stones juts from the water just beyond the shoreline. They resemble the tops of broken towers or the ribs of an ancient ship. But those who have lived here long enough know better. The stones are not shipwrecks. They are the remaining spines of an ancient structure, once built on dry land, a ceremonial platform carved long before the shoreline retreated. Now submerged, it sleeps with its idols. A mainstream historical fact roots us here. In several coastal regions of the ancient world, sea levels rose abruptly around the early Iron Age, swallowing entire settlements. Archaeologists have identified submerged sanctuaries, harbours, and stone circles beneath shallow waters across the Mediterranean and Near East. Yet the one before us is older than any recorded flood. The villagers say this shrine was already ancient when the first herders arrived, already abandoned, already watching from the tide. And the idols beneath the waves? They say those were carved before the world had proper names. No one dives here. Not anymore. The last recorded attempt happened nearly a century ago, when an optimistic professor from a regional university organized a small expedition. He brought students, ropes, crude underwater lenses, and confidence born of academic distance rather than local listening. His notes from the first day were enthusiastic. The notes from the second day grew cautious. The notes from the third day ended abruptly. Only one diver returned. He spoke little of what he saw, but when pressed, he described a row of stone figures standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the waves. Tall, thin, crowned with long curling headdresses. Their eyes, though blurred by silt, were unmistakably wide and open, as if watching from a deep, dreamlike patience. And then he said something that troubled even the professor. They were facing the shore, not facing each other, not facing the open sea, facing the land, as though guarding something behind them. The professor dismissed the diver's fear as disorientation. But the next morning the diver's footprints led down the beach and disappeared at the waterline. He was never seen again. The professor closed the expedition and abandoned further work. The villagers had not been surprised. "The sea keeps what belongs to it," they murmured. A fringe detail comes from an elderly fisherman, now long past. He claimed that at dawn, just when the sky is pale, and the tide still rising, the tops of the idols' headdresses break the surface. He said they glistened in the new light like whetstone birds, each one turning slightly, imperceptibly, as though adjusting to the day's first breath. He insisted the idols move. Not walk, not rise, just tilt, just listen. And though scholars still debate whether such sightings were illusions caused by shifting waves or drifting kelp, the fisherman's daughter swears her father was not prone to fancies. He was a man of few words. If he said the sea listened, then it listened. As we step closer to the shore, the sand sinks slightly beneath our weight, cold and damp. Small shells crack underfoot. A trail of water recedes from our approach, withdrawing with a delicate hesitancy, as though reluctant to give ground. The waves move in a peculiar pattern here, not the usual predictable pulse of tides, but a rhythm that seems to adjust in subtle ways, lengthening, shortening, hesitating, as if responding to unseen cues. For those who pay attention, the pattern matches the faint hum we heard earlier in the river and the rhythmic echoes beneath the ziggurat. Memory, once again, shifting form with the landscape. A local tale follows us like a low, steady tide. Once each generation, someone hears a sound beneath the waves. Not a roar, not a crash, but a long, rising call that resembles the echo of a conch shell blown far away beneath the surface. The sound travels through the bones rather than the ears. The villagers say this happens when the idols stir, not physically, but in intent. A young woman once claimed she heard the underwater call while walking along the beach at dusk. She described the sensation as if the sea itself were breathing inward, drawing her attention towards something deep below. She stood still, watching the horizon darken, until she saw far out, too far for waves to break, a faint ripple form, a perfect circle, a ring of disturbance, a boundary marking something ancient, waking beneath the water. The next morning, she returned to the spot and found delicate spirals etched in the wet sand, patterns identical to those seen on ancient river stones miles inland. The sea had, for one night, remembered its connection to the land. As we noted earlier, each region we've crossed carries memory differently. In tombs, memory whispered. In dunes it hummed. In plateaus it lingered. In rivers it murmured. And beneath the canopy it prowled. Here, the sea guards. Not as a watchman, not as a sentinel, as a keeper. The idols beneath the waves are part of that keeping stone figures, performing a task so old that even local myth shrugs when asked for detail. Their purpose has been forgotten, only their vigil remains. Tonight, the tide creeps inward with deliberate quiet. The water darkens as the sun melts into the horizon. And for a moment, we see the faintest suggestion of shapes beneath the surface, tall, vertical, unmoving, watching. A thin vibration travels through the sand under our feet. Not a tremor, not a wave, something slower, deeper, a pulse rising from far below. The sea inhales, and then, from somewhere beneath the water, a long, low note emerges. A call shaped not by throat or flute, but by stone shifting against stone. The idols are listening, and now, something beneath them has begun to answer. Steps where horse lords fade. Beyond the coastline, where the sea's quiet vigilance softens into mist, the land rises once more, not sharply, not abruptly, but in a long, deliberate swell. The air dries, the soil opens. Grass spreads in shimmering waves across the horizon, and soon the world becomes a vast, unbroken steppe, rolling outward in golden green sheets that catch the light like brushed silk. Here the wind carries no scent of salt or forest, only open space, only distance, only memory riding on the back of the breeze. This is the realm the elders call the fading plains, where the horse lords once rode riders whose names dissolved into grass long before ink found its first clay tablet. Their hoofprints have vanished, their campsites collapsed into earth, their songs scattered in fragments across the wind. Yet something remains, a presence that moves with the same quiet power the sea held, but stretched across open sky rather than sunken depths. The steps feel watched, though nothing stands tall enough to hide a watcher. They feel listened to, though the wind never stills long enough to truly hear. The horse lords were real history, confirms that much. A mainstream detail grounds us. During the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, nomadic equestrian cultures traversed these grasslands, linking vast regions through trade and conflict, carrying early chariots and bronze-tipped spears. Archaeology gives us bone buckles, scattered arrowheads, the occasional burial mound. But these plains hold stories older than those artifacts, stories the locals whisper only on windless nights. They say the riders never left. Not entirely. The first sign of the steppe's strange memory appears in the way the grass moves. Even when the wind dies, certain patches ripple small, elliptical motions, as if something galloped just beyond vision. Shepherds insist they sometimes hear hoofbeats too. Soft, rhythmic, distant, moving in lines that don't match any animal known today. Once, a herdsman swore he saw dust rise in a narrow trail across the plains, not thick, not storm-like, but a straight ribbon lifted by no visible cause. The dust moved with the cadence of mounted riders, a long rush, then a pause, then another. He watched the invisible procession pass by, his sheep lowering their heads in unison, as if recognizing something the man could not see. Another herder told of a night when he was returning home beneath a moon swollen and pale. He heard horses breathing right behind him, deep, steady exhales, warm enough to stir the hair on his neck. But when he turned, the plain was empty. He called out. Silence answered him. He never walked that route again after sundown. Some fringe historians argue that the phenomenon may come from temperature inversions, optical distortions carried across miles of uninterrupted grass. Others suggest memory plays tricks in places so vast and empty. Yet the villagers accept these moments with quiet certainty. The plains remember their riders, an elder says, and memory rides with its own shadow. The steppes also hold something peculiar, an occurrence so consistent across generations that dismissing it becomes difficult. At twilight, just as the sun dips low enough to cast long shadows across the grass, riders appear at the horizon. Not clearly, not bodily, but as silhouettes tall, proud, unnaturally still standing against the darkening sky. They do not move. They do not approach. They simply remain until the last light vanishes. And then, as night settles fully, the silhouettes dissolve into the broad, swallowing dusk. One trader claimed that he once saw the figures shift slightly, lifting their heads, as though scenting the wind. Another claimed the silhouettes turned toward each other, as if sharing a distant conversation. But no one has ever walked close enough to test the truth. The figures vanish long before the living can reach them. Yet those silhouettes are not the strangest memory carried by these plains. At the center of the steppe lies an ancient mound, long eroded by wind but still rising subtly from the sea of grass. It is not marked on maps. The villagers avoid it. Horses refuse to approach it, turning sharply away even when guided. The soil atop the mound is dark, richer than the surrounding land, as though nourished by something deep below. Legends claim it is the burial place of a great horse lord, a rider whose mount lived and died with him, whose spirit galloped into the afterworld with a speed unmatched by any living creature. But others whisper a different kind of story, that the mound is not a grave, but a door, a place where the riders pass through the world rather than leaving it. A fringe detail deepens the mystery. More than once, archaeologists have reported compasses spinning wildly atop the mound, a rare anomaly on such open terrain. In one documented case, a researcher described a faint tremor rising from the soil, rhythmic and pulsed, like a heartbeat beneath her boots. Another noted that birds never fly directly over the mound. They are wide, maintaining a respectful distance. As we step closer, the grass shifts not with wind, but with a slow, coordinated ripple, as though responding to our presence. The air cools. Shadows lengthen unnaturally, stretching sideways rather than behind us. A faint sound drifts across the plain, the soft whinny of a horse, though none are near. And then, carried on a breeze that wasn't there a moment ago, a second sound follows, the hollow thump of hooves striking earth. Not one set, many. Steady, measured, aware. As we noted earlier, each landscape has carried its own kind of memory. Whispering tombs, humming dunes, lingering plateaus, listening rivers, watchful forests, guarded seas. Here on the steppes, memory gallops swift, restless, unbound by the lines between past and present. These plains hold history like breath, shaped not in stone or reed, but in motion itself. The mound looms ahead, darker than the grass around it. A faint shimmer flickers at its crest, not light, not heat. Something in between, like the afterimage of movement too fast to see clearly. The air grows heavy with the scent of earth stirred long ago. Then, as the sun slips fully beneath the horizon, the silhouettes appear. Dozens. Tall, proud, aligned along the ridge of the mound. Their horses stand in perfect stillness. Their riders seem to turn their heads toward us, though we cannot be sure. The air grows tight, as though the world itself holds its breath. A final sound rises unmistakable, deliberate. A single hoof striking the ground. Soft, claiming attention, acknowledging presence, and then a second hoof answers, and a third. Not threatening, not warning, just a greeting from riders who have never quite finished crossing this plain. The silhouettes shimmer once, as though rippling with contained motion, and then they begin to move. Not toward us, but along the horizon, riding a path that no longer exists, riding a memory that refuses to fade. Caves of the icebound shamans. The steps fall away slowly, like a great beast settling into sleep, and the air begins to sharpen once more. Grass thins, earth rises, and on the horizon, pale ridges appear first as faint scratches against the sky, then as long white scars of ancient frost. The temperature cools with each step, the wind gathering a new edge, cold enough to taste on the tongue. Soon the land climbs into a region the elders call the White Breath, a place where winter's memory never fully loosens its grip. Here lie the caves not beneath the hills as one might expect, but carved into ice itself. Long, narrow mouths open along the glacier's base, dark against the frozen walls. The entrances breathe thin, cold vapor that drifts outward in slow curls, like exhalations from something sleeping deep within. The villagers call them the ice-bound caves of the shamans, and though no one has lived here in generations, the stories have never thawed. The cold here has a personality. It does not bite or sting, it watches. A mainstream historical truth grounds us. Across the prehistoric north, long before written language emerged, shamans acted as intermediaries between humans and the unseen. Evidence from the 6th millennium BCE carvings, ritual tools, ochre-stained bones suggests deep cave spaces served as ceremonial chambers. Yet this glacier is older still, its passages shifting subtly as ice breathes. The shamans who once walked here may belong to a lineage that predates known cultures entirely. Locals say the caves hold their memories with a persistence even death could not undo. The cold, after all, preserves. The first cave we approach opens in a tall arc, its edges lined with translucent blue ice. Inside, the walls shimmer faintly in the thin light streaks of trapped air forming patterns like frozen script. The quiet deepens with each step, thinning into an almost painful stillness. Sound cannot seem to find its way through the air. Even our breath vanishes into the silence without echo. A hunter from decades past told a story of entering this same cavern one winter evening. He had become lost in sudden snowfall and sought refuge in the cave. He lit a small fire, expecting the warmth to fill the chamber. But instead, the flames bent sideways, drawn toward the dark passageway deeper within. When he tried to move his hand through the air above the flame, he felt not warmth, but an unnatural cold. A cold that pulsed, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat reversed. He doused the fire and fled into the storm. Other stories are quieter, stranger. One tale speaks of a young girl who wandered into the ice caves during a season when the glacier breathed heavily, a phenomenon where the ice expands and contracts, creating groans that echo for miles. She ventured only a few steps inside before hearing someone humming. The voice was low, steady, soothing, like a lullaby sung from a deep chamber. She followed the sound deeper, convinced it was her grandmother. But when she reached the inner chamber, the humming stopped. She was alone. The only thing she found was a circle of stones on the frozen floor stones, arranged in a pattern identical to the waiting ring on the plateau far to the south. A strange coincidence, impossible to explain. Yet she said the circle felt warm, as if someone had just stepped away from it moments before. When she returned home, her grandmother insisted she had never left the hearth that day. Scholars still debate whether these stories reflect natural acoustics within the ice, or something more psychological. Yet one detail remains difficult to dismiss: recorded temperature drops. In 1978, a research team conducted measurements within several of the glacier's inner chambers. They documented sudden temperature shifts, pockets of heat and cold that appeared and vanished without explanation. The coldest spot, they noted, formed a perfect circle, exactly where the girl claimed to have found the stone ring. One fringe theory suggests the caves once housed a ritual space in which shamans attempted to communicate with forces tied to the glacier spirits of ice, ancestors preserved in frozen breath, or memories carried by the land itself. Some theorists propose that sound, temperature, and even light behave differently here because the shamans manipulated them through ritual practice. Most archaeologists reject this idea outright, but the villagers do not. They speak of the shamans with quiet respect, not as mystics or prophets, but as listeners, people who understood that ice stores not just water, but histories. The glacier keeps the voices it likes, an elder once said, and lets them out when it chooses. Deeper in the cavern, the ice walls widen into a chamber shaped like a hollowed heart. Stalactites of ice hang like frozen teeth, their tips sharp but glimmering softly. Beneath them lies a shallow depression filled with water, so still it reflects perfectly a pool clearer than glass, so transparent it appears bottomless. This is the place where, according to legend, the shamans once performed rites of reflection, not meditation, not prayer. Reflection, the act of gazing into water that remembers. Some say the pool shows visions. Others insist it simply reveals what is hidden. And one tale tells of a traveller who looked into the pool and saw not himself, but a figure standing behind him. A tall figure draped in furs, with a mask fashioned from polished ice. The figure raised a hand, and when the traveller turned, the chamber was empty. He never returned to the caves. As we noted in earlier landscapes, memory has chosen many forms: whispering tombs, singing dunes, lingering plateaus, watchful forests, guarding seas. Here in the glacier, memory condenses into frost. It crystallizes. It turns breath into artifact. The deeper we walk, the colder the air becomes, but not in a natural way. It is a cold that seems aware of us, adjusting itself in slow pulses. The ice beneath our feet groans softly, not as if cracking, but as if speaking through layered centuries. The sound travels upward, vibrating faintly through our bones. A narrow passage opens on the left. It is darker than the rest, a darkness that seems to drink the faint blue light. The villagers call this tunnel the Shaman's Vein, believing it leads to a hidden chamber where only the initiated once walked. Few have ever stepped inside. Those who did tell of hearing footsteps behind them, soft, deliberate, perfectly synchronized with their own steps, as though shadowing rather than following. They claimed the air thickened suddenly, not with danger, but with expectation. One man insisted he heard someone whisper his name, not aloud, but inside his mind, shaped from cold air and echoing long after he fled. Tonight, the glacier breathes. A long, low groan travels through the ice. The pool ripples once. The stalactites tremble. And from the shaman's vein, a faint sound rises, a soft rhythmic tapping, eerily familiar, like the knock beneath the ziggurat. Once, twice, then silence, as though something buried deep in ice has just realized we have found its threshold. Oaks that shelter druid whispers. The glacier exhales a final cold breath behind us as we descend once more into softer landstones, giving way to soil, frost loosening its grip, air warming degree by gentle degree. The world changes slowly, thoughtfully, as though guiding us toward a place that remembers warmth as deeply as the ice remembered silence. Soon the horizon bristles with trunks thick, ancient, curved with centuries of wind. We have arrived in the realm of the oaks. They rise in sprawling clusters, their branches tangled like old hands folded in ritual. Moss drapes them in muted greens, draping each trunk with a patient softness. And beneath their broad canopies, the air turns calm. Not quiet, but calm, an atmosphere that feels tended, as if someone long ago placed a blessing in the soil and the trees have upheld it ever since. Locals call this wood the Druid's Hold, though no one alive remembers a druid with certainty. Yet the name remains because the forest feels inhabited, not by people, not by spirits in the frightening sense, inhabited by memory so distilled that it behaves like presence. The first step beneath the oaks hushes the world. Sound softens, the wind dims. Even the bird song changes pitch, as though adjusting to rules older than their bloodline. A mainstream historical anchor steadies us here. Across Iron Age Europe, roughly 800 BCE to the start of Roman expansion, Druidic traditions played a central role in ritual, law, and knowledge-keeping. Roman writers described groves as sacred sites, places where teachings were spoken but never written. But those accounts are distant echoes of a culture that kept its truths hidden from ink. Druid knowledge moved from tongue to ear, breath to breath. And here, in these oaks, the breath of old speech still lingers. The forest floor is soft, with leaf fall layered so thick that each step feels muted. A faint scent of peat, resin, and something sweet, perhaps wildflowers far away, curls upward with each footstep. The oaks lean in strange angles, as if whispering secrets to one another. And though the sun above is strong, the canopy filters it into drifting beams that seem to pause mid-air, suspended as though listening. The villagers who live on the forest's outskirts claim the oaks talk. Not with human voices, with motion, with breath. With creaks that follow no wind, and with leaves that rustle patterns too deliberate to be random. They say that on some mornings, if you listen closely, you can hear a soft cadence rising between the trunks. Not song, not speech, something between. Some insist it is the remnant of Druidic chants once performed here, chants woven from memory, earth, and intention. Scholars still debate whether any grove can truly hold ritual resonance across millennia. But those who walk these woods speak with unshakable certainty. This grove remembers. The first myth threaded through the forest is one of disappearance. It tells of a druid circle that once met under the largest oak, an enormous tree with a twisted spine and roots sprawling like sleeping serpents. Every midsummer, the circle gathered to perform rites that required neither fire nor offering, only stillness. They would place their palms on the trunk, breathe in unison, and wait. For what? No one knows. The story never explains. But one year, as the sun peaked and the world grew impossibly quiet, the entire circle vanished. No struggle, no footprints, no disturbance. Only the soft imprint of several palms left in the bark, warmed as if touched moments before. The tree stands still. The imprints do not fade. A fringe detail heightens the mystery. Several travelers claim that if you place your own palm over one of the imprints, aligning fingers to the ancient grooves, a warmth spreads into your hand, up your arm, and into your chest. A low hum vibrates through the bark, and for a brief, fleeting moment, you feel as though someone stands very close behind you, watching, listening, breathing in sync. No one stays long enough to discover what comes next. As we walk deeper, the trees grow larger, thicker trunks, broader branches, roots knotted into shapes resembling old symbols. The air grows heavier too, not oppressive, but full, saturated with something like intention. It is here that the forest begins to reveal its stranger qualities. Leaves fall even when the air is still, but they fall in patterns. Trails of leaves spiral gently downward, forming loose rings around certain stones, or gathering near the base of particular trees. Hunters claim the leaves arrange themselves differently each morning, as though the grove is rewriting something, as though memory isn't a static thing here but a practice. We pass a low stone half sunk into the soil, its surface etched with lines, weathered, nearly erased. Yet the faint curves resemble the spirals we saw in the tombs, the river, even beneath the sea. It is too consistent to be coincidence. The Druids may not have carved this stone. It may be older than them, an artifact discovered, studied, and protected. Scholars still debate whether these forest spirals connect to a broader prehistoric symbolic tradition or if they emerged independently. But tonight, standing beneath the quiet canopy, the symbols feel less like marks and more like echoes. A quiet story drifts forward from a nearby village, a tale of a child who once wandered into this grove during a season of heavy rains. Alone, she found herself beneath the largest oak, shivering under its massive canopy. She sat at its base, listening to the rain striking the leaves above. And then she heard it, a soft murmur, like someone speaking through layers of earth. Not words, not meaning, just cadence. The child pressed her ear to the trunk. The sound deepened. She later described it as the tree dreaming. When she was found hours later, she was warm despite the cold, and she insisted someone had wrapped her in a blanket of leaves that were gone by the time her parents arrived. The parents never contradicted her story. Another account comes from a farmer who cut wood near the grove's edge one late autumn afternoon. As he split a fallen log, he heard a sharp, echoing cry behind him, brief, powerful, and completely human. He spun around instinctively. No one stood there. No wind. No bird. Just the oak trunks, silent and still. But when he looked down, the fallen leaves had arranged themselves in a spiral at his feet. He dropped his tools and left. For years afterward, he refused to enter the grove again. As we noted earlier, the landscapes we've crossed carry memory in distinct forms, sung, whispered, preserved, guarded. Here, beneath the branching arms of these ancient oaks, memory moves. It arranges, it breathes. This is not a haunted place. It is a remembering place. And tonight, that remembering turns toward us. The forest thickens. A faint breeze stirs the leaves, not widespread, but focused, like breath moving through a narrow hallway. The canopy rustles, but only above us. A shadow shifts near the largest oak, a ripple of darkness that curls inward like a cat settling to rest. Then the whispering begins. Soft, layered, harmonic. Not language, something older. The air cools as though someone has drawn near. Leaves descend in slow, spiraling motions. A faint glow touches the bark, not light, but a gentle softening of the darkness, as though the tree exhaled memory. Behind us, a low creak resonates, deliberate, measured, like a bow being drawn across a string. One oak leans slightly, just enough to acknowledge a presence. Our presence. The whispering deepens for a moment, then stops. Silence returns, not empty, but full, waiting. And from the far side of the grove, barely audible, a single druidic cadence rises. A breath drawn in, a breath released, as though the grove has recognized us and chosen to continue the conversation. Colosseums hiding, gladiatorial ghosts. The oaks recede slowly, their branches releasing us like old hands parting after a long, unspoken farewell. The air warms, the light steadies, and the earth flattens into a quiet plain. At first it seems empty. A long stretch of grass, a few scattered stones. But as we walk, shapes begin to rise from the horizon, curved, broken, yet unmistakably architectural. The skeleton of an ancient Colosseum appears, half consumed by time, its stone ribs arching like the remnants of some great beast that once roared in the heart of civilization. Here the air feels thicker, not with humidity or heat, but with memory. The very soil seems to carry the echo of thousands of footsteps, thousands of breaths held at once, thousands of hearts beating in anticipation of spectacle. And beneath that echo lies something quieter, the presence of those who did not leave when the crowds dispersed, those who died with their stories unspoken. The villagers call this place the Echoing Arena. No empire claims it, no official history links it to any recorded city. But its form is unmistakable. Rising tiers of stone seating, worn to soft curves, archways leading into shadowed corridors, and at the center, a wide oval floor where grass now grows in unruly tufts. It looks Roman, perhaps, but older, rougher, built with a style that predates the grand amphitheaters of the empire. A mainstream historical detail anchors us. Before Rome perfected the amphitheater, earlier iterations existed among the Etruscans and Greeks. Simple, oval arenas, where ritual combat, games, and funerary contests took place. Some scholars argue that lesser-known cultures between the Mediterranean and Central Asia also built proto-colosseums for ritualized displays. This structure may belong to one such lineage, emerging in the centuries just before Rome's rise. But the villagers tell a different story. They say the arena predates civilization in this region, predates empire, predates writing. Built by a people who believed combat was not entertainment, but communication. The first corridor we enter is cool and narrow, lit by slivers of sunlight that filter through cracks in the stone. Moss clings to the walls, and the faint scent of iron lingers, though no metal remains. The ground beneath our feet feels uneven, as though shaped by footsteps that never fully settled into stillness. A whisper drifts through the corridor, soft, indistinct, as though carried on breath rather than wind. We pause. The whisper fades. Then another rises behind us, closer. Villagers insist the arena is full of voices at dusk, not aggressive, not tormenting, just present. They say gladiators, or whatever the ancient combatants were called here, still walk the corridors, searching for their entrances, rehearsing rituals long forbidden by time. One tale, preserved by an elderly shepherd, speaks of a traveller who camped inside the arena one night. He slept beneath a broken archway, believing the place harmless. But he woke abruptly to the sound of heavy breathing, strong, controlled, practiced. The breaths moved around him in a deliberate circle, as though someone large and muscular were warming up for combat. He dared not open his eyes. When dawn arrived, the ground around him was disturbed, marked by footprints in the dust human, barefoot, yet spaced as though made by someone of immense height. The traveller left the region before noon. As we walk toward the center of the arena, sunlight fans across the open oval. The grass sways gently, bending in patches that do not match the direction of the breeze. Something moves beneath it, a ripple, slow and deliberate, like a figure pacing just below the surface of light. Scholars still debate the phenomenon known locally as the phantom stride. Some say it's caused by subsoil erosion or hidden tunnels. Others suggest rising air currents distort the grass. But villagers maintain the truth with calm certainty. The grass bends beneath invisible footsteps. Once, a visiting historian observed the phenomenon at midday when the sun was brightest. He recorded seeing long, sweeping impressions cross the arena floor in a straight line. When he stepped toward them, the impressions shifted direction as though avoiding him. He followed them with scientific curiosity until they abruptly vanished, not fading, but ending sharply in a single point, as if the walker stopped, or turned, or noticed him. He did not pursue further. The arena's acoustics add another layer to the strangeness. Even in ruins, the structure amplifies certain sounds. A whisper spoken near the lowest tier can be heard perfectly at the topmost arch. Yet other sounds, footsteps, breathing, even human voices, sometimes vanish entirely, swallowed by pockets of silence that drift unpredictably. One fringe account tells of a scholar who attempted to map these silent zones. She discovered that the zones formed a pattern across the arena floor, a spiral, not unlike the spirals we've encountered in tombs, rivers, and forests. She marked each silent zone with chalk. When she returned the next morning, her markings were gone. Not washed away, not faded. Gone. The chalk was simply not there. As we noted earlier in the Oaks, memory can arrange itself in ritual patterns. Here, the ritual seems to be reenactment, a cycle of repeated movements played out by presences we cannot see, but whose actions continue in the woven echoes of the arena. At dusk, villagers say, the arena shifts. Light bends strangely across its stones. Shadows stretch in directions impossible for the angle of the sun, and sometimes figures appear. Not whole figures, not solid, just silhouettes. Tall shapes standing on the tiers, unmoving, watching the arena floor below. Some appear helmeted, some bareheaded. A few carry long spears of shadow, others rest hands upon invisible shields. They do not move. They do not breathe. They simply witness. Legend claims that on rare nights, one of the figures steps forward, descending the ancient stairs with a slow, deliberate gait. Each step echoes faintly, though no weight presses the stone. When it reaches the arena floor, the air thickens around it, and a faint metallic scent fills the space. Some say it reenacts the final moments of its life. Others insist it waits for someone to challenge it. The most unsettling tale, however, involves a local boy who entered the arena on a dare. As he crossed the sandy floor, he felt the air tighten around him. The wind died. The birds stopped calling. And then he heard a voice, a low, steady whisper spoken directly into his left ear. "Stand your ground." He froze. The whisper came again, calm, commanding. "Stand." He did. For a long moment, the world remained utterly still. Then, from somewhere across the arena, another whisper answered, deeper, resonant, like a voice hardened by old battles. "Advance." The boy ran until he reached the safety of the village. He never returned. Tonight, as the sun melts into a burnt orange glow, the Colosseum settles into its twilight form. Shadows lengthen across the tiers. The air cools, thickening with old breath. The grass in the center bends in unnatural waves, as though countless feet shift into position. And then unmistakably, a figure moves along the topmost arch. A silhouette, tall and straight, pauses as though taking measure of the arena. The last light glints faintly through its translucent shape. The air holds still. A second silhouette emerges. Then a third. All watching, all waiting. The arena floor stirs a long ripple, like the beginning of a run, and from the depths of a broken corridor, a single, metallic ring echoes. A sword drawn. Or perhaps, remembered. Pagodas echoing forbidden chants. The Colosseum's last metallic echo fades behind us like a blade cooling in the dusk, and the land shifts once more, subtly at first, then decisively. The air grows warmer, touched with a faint sweetness like incense carried on a hidden breeze. The wind changes direction, trees return, but not as oaks or pines. Their trunks rise tall and straight, bark smooth as polished clay. Their leaves shimmer in narrow, feathered layers, catching light in soft golden ribbons. Soon the horizon lifts into gentle hills carved with ancient stone terraces, and at their peaks stand the silhouettes of pagodas, tiered, elegant, rising like stacked shadows against the sky. Their roofs curve upward like the corners of a quiet smile, each tier catching the fading sunlight with deliberate grace. This is a land shaped by ritual order, and memory acquires a new discipline. The villagers call this region the Whispering Heights. They never climb it, not because of danger, but because they believe the hills belong to watchers older and more patient than human lineage. Even their livestock walks the long way around, skirting the foothills in wide arcs. The pagodas, 3 in total, rest in a triangular alignment, their foundations worn by centuries yet miraculously intact. No carvings declare their purpose, no inscription marks their builders. The architecture resembles no known dynasty perfectly, though hints of early East Asian influence glimmer in their symmetry. They feel foreign, but not unfamiliar, as though transplanted from a culture that existed in the pauses between history's breaths. A mainstream historical detail grounds us. Across Asia, between 200 BCE and 1000 CE, pagodas evolved as sacred structures, often housing relics, scrolls, or ritual chambers. Their tiered forms symbolized ascension, enlightenment, the layers between earth and sky. But these pagodas predate those by centuries, perhaps a millennium. Their roofs are too steep, their central columns too wide, their stonework too unweathered for their supposed age. They are older than they should be, and yet preserved beyond reason. Locals whisper that the pagodas were built not to honor the sacred, but to contain it. The first steps up the hillside feel like entering a different season. The air cools but grows heavier, as though weighted by invisible attention. Wind funnels upward, circling the lowest staircase of the first pagoda before dispersing into faint spirals. Even insects avoid the ascent, hovering at the tree line below but never crossing the invisible threshold. A fringe detail emerges from a wandering monk who passed through the region 2 generations ago. He claimed that each pagoda housed a different chant not written, but bound into its stones. He spoke of entering the first pagoda at dawn and hearing a deep vibration echoing through the pillars. Not loud, not intrusive. A bass resonance felt more in the chest than heard in the ears. He insisted the sound responded to movement rising or falling in pitch depending on where he stepped. When he reached the center of the chamber, the vibration ceased entirely. In its absence, he heard another sound. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Not his own. He left before sunrise. We climbed the first staircase, worn into soft depressions by centuries of weather, or perhaps by countless feet, whose owners have long since vanished. At the top, the pagoda's entrance yawns open, revealing a dark interior lined with vertical beams. They rise like wooden ribs supporting the structure's tiered spine. Dust motes float through the sunbeams in thin, deliberate spirals, moving as though guided by a steady pulse. Inside, the silence is immense, not empty, but structured, like the silence that precedes a ritual, the kind of silence that expects something of you. The villagers say that on certain days when the wind hesitates at the exact moment the sun reaches its zenith, the pagodas speak. They do not mean words, they mean chants. The earliest tale speaks of a pair of shepherd brothers who sought shelter in the second pagoda during a summer storm. Rain hammered the hillsides, thunder cracked low, and they huddled beneath the central beam. When lightning struck the hilltop nearby, the air inside the pagoda shifted. The sound that rose from the floorboards was soft at first, a vibrating hum, almost like the caves we left behind. But then the hum layered itself, expanding into multiple tones. Low, higher, higher still, a harmony built from stones and beams. The brothers fled into the storm. Others tell of a ritual once performed here in secrecy, a chant forbidden by a dynasty whose name has been lost. According to whispered history, the chant could divide the soul, allowing the initiated to step between states of being, not death, not dreaming, something in between. A liminal consciousness reserved for shamans or monks of rare discipline. Scholars still debate whether such claims represent symbolic metaphors or literal practices. But the villagers believe the chant remains inside these pagodas, repeating itself in faint echoes whenever the air is still enough to remember. As we move deeper into the first chamber, the light dims. Wooden pillars creak, though no wind stirs them. A faint scent of incense lingers, sandalwood mixed with something sharper, metallic. Footsteps echo too loudly despite the soft floor. The air thickens as though shaped by unseen presences standing just beyond reach. Then we hear it. A tone. Low, resonant, vibrating through the floorboards. Not loud, but unmistakably deliberate. It pulses twice, then stops. We exchange the silence with the pagoda, waiting for it to continue its forgotten chant. But instead, something else happens. The walls release a faint shimmer. Not light exactly, but a shimmering distortion like heat rising from stone. It moves in circular ripples along the wood, tracing ancient patterns in slow waves. These ripples resemble spirals, the same spirals we've seen etched in tombs, in rivers, in forests, in the silent archive. And here they move, like living memory mapping itself onto the walls. We step back, and the shimmer slows. A faint whisper reaches us from the upper tier, a thin, lilting syllable repeated over and over. Su, su, su. Not a word. A sound. A chant fragment. A memory of breath. A call from a ritual long forbidden. As we noted earlier, landscapes preserve memory differently in dunes, in ice, in stone. Here, memory takes the form of resonance, sound, breath that refuses to dissolve. And the chant that echoes in this pagoda seems to recognize our presence, shifting gently, as though acknowledging new listeners after centuries of silence. We leave the first pagoda and approach the second. This one feels heavier. Its roof dips slightly, shadows clinging to the eaves even in broad daylight. The wind here does not rise. It falls descending the hillside like a slow exhale. The doorway is narrower, the interior darker, and as we step inside, the temperature drops sharply. A whisper reaches us immediately. Not a breeze, not an echo. A voice. Soft, breathy, repeating a pattern like a mantra spoken by someone just waking from a long sleep. We freeze. The voice continues. Then a second joins it. Then a third. Layered harmonics build from the darkness, rising like a chorus stirring from centuries of stillness. The tones vibrate through the wooden floorboards into our bones. The effect is not frightening. It is intimate. A gathering of presences waking, acknowledging one another, recognizing the stir of breath in their chamber. And then, a sudden stop. All sound ceases. A single footstep echoes behind us. Measured, close. Breath warms the back of our neck. We turn. No one stands there. But the darkness at the threshold shifts, thinning, as though something unseen has just stepped farther inside. The whispering rises again, barely audible now. A chant fragment curls through the air. Su, Ra, Sai. A name? A plea? A ritual command? The pagoda offers no interpretation. It simply waits. Then, from the highest tier of the hill, where the third pagoda stands, a low, resonant hum begins deeper than thunder, older than language. A sound that vibrates through the bones of the surrounding landscape. A forbidden chant awakening after centuries of silence. And it is calling. To us. Or perhaps to something that has finally returned. Mounds, concealing serpent mounds. The pagodas fade behind us like lingering chords dissolving into quiet air, their final hum settling into the hills as though returning to a long, rhythmic sleep. The land slopes downward, widening into a broad, low plain. Grass thickens, soil darkens. And soon the earth begins to rise again in subtle shapes, long, gentle swells that repeat in patterns too deliberate to be natural. At first they resemble simple burial mounds. Then, as the light shifts, their true forms reveal themselves. They coil, curve, lengthen, stretch across the plain in sinuous arcs, like the frozen bodies of serpents sleeping beneath the soil. Locals call this region the Serpent's Rest, a land where ancient builders shaped the earth into forms meant to be seen from above, though no one knows how they achieved such perspective. The mounds trace elaborate designs, some spiraling inward, others stretching toward distant stars that once held ritual meaning. But the largest mound, the one at the center of the plain, coils in a perfect serpentine loop, its head raised in a soft curve that looks almost poised to strike. The villagers do not approach it, not at night, not at dawn, not even at midday when the sun is strongest. They say the serpent beneath the soil is not metaphor, not myth. Something sleeps here, and the earth remembers its breathing. A mainstream historical truth steadies our step. Across prehistoric North America and parts of Eurasia, serpent-shaped mounds appear in cultures separated widely by both geography and time. Some date back as early as 3000 BCE. Their purpose remains uncertain: astronomical markers, ritual pathways, burial sites for revered figures. Some align with solstice sunsets, others align with lunar cycles. But none on record match the breadth or precision of the mound before us. This one is wrong in scale, too long, too smooth, too deliberate, and too alive. The first thing we notice as we draw near is the warmth radiating from the soil. Even as evening cools the air, the mound gives off subtle heat. Not the warmth of sun-baked earth, deeper, steady, almost like the warmth of a living body at rest. Villagers say the mound breathes, though no rise or fall is visible. They insist you can feel the pulse of the serpent if you stand on the coil's highest ridge. Few have tried. Those who did returned pale, trembling, unable to describe what they felt. One shepherd confessed that while standing atop the mound, he sensed the earth shift beneath him, a slow, muscular tension, as though something enormous had stirred far below. He felt a rhythm, subtle but undeniable, beating into the soles of his feet. Not a heartbeat, he whispered, a listening. And then, he said, he felt breath. A faint warmth rising through the soil, as if the mound inhaled the scent of the world. He never climbed it again. The mound's geometry grows stranger as we approach the apex. Lines of small stones run along its sides, smooth, rounded, set in patterns that appear at first random, then resolve into spirals. Spirals large and small, spirals within spirals. The same motif woven through tombs, dunes, rivers, forests, pagodas. This place remembers the same language. A fringe theory proposes that serpent mounds were once part of a ritual landscape network, a web of earth and symbol, connecting distant cultures through shared cosmology. Scholars still debate the plausibility. Some argue the similarity of motifs arises independently. Others whisper that ancient travelers carried symbols across continents. But here, beneath this sky, the spirals feel less like coincidence and more like a chain linked across lands we've already crossed. A peculiar phenomenon accompanies these mounds. At twilight, when the sun dips low enough to paint the sky in amber, shadows behave unnaturally. The serpent mounds cast silhouettes that stretch farther than their height, should allow impossibly long shadows that curl across the plain, coiling around themselves as though writhing in slow, silent motion. One traveller passing through the region claimed to see the mounds shift in the half-light, not rising, not collapsing, just adjusting small, subtle movements like the twitch of a muscle beneath skin. He swore one segment lifted slightly before settling again. He fled before nightfall. Another tale describes a woman who visited the mounds to gather herbs. While cutting roots near the serpent's head, she heard a low hiss, soft, breath-like, She thought it wind passing through tall grass, until she realized the grass was still. When she knelt to gather her tools, she saw the soil tremble beneath her fingertips, forming small, concentric circles, as though rippled by an unseen exhale. She left her herbs behind. Deeper in the mound's coil, a small depression forms a circular clearing. The soil here is darker, richer, and oddly smooth. Locals call it the serpent's eye. Strange events occur here, compasses spinning, animals refusing to enter, fires flickering sideways or extinguishing without cause. Centuries ago, according to a half-remembered chronicle, a wandering ascetic rested in the serpent's eye. He described hearing a voice rising from beneath the soil, not a human voice, not a hiss, but a low, resonant vibration. Words formed without sound, meaning pressed gently against his thoughts. The voice, he wrote, asked a question. Not in language, but in sensation, a pressure mounting behind the sternum, a tug at the edges of the mind. A question about memory, a question about return. He fled before he understood it. As we noted earlier, the world we've travelled through carries memory in many shapes. Whispers, hums, spirals, chants. Here, memory coils, protects, waits. The serpent mound is not a tomb, not a shrine. It is a boundary, a guardian shaped from earth and intention. And tonight, as dusk deepens, the mound stirs. A faint vibration travels through the ground, soft, rhythmic, like the pulse of the glacier, like the hum of the dunes, like the breath in the pagodas. The stones along the mound's spine warm slightly beneath our hands. Grass bends outward in a circular pattern, as though pushed by a rising current. Then, unmistakably, the soil lifts. Just a fraction. A slow, subtle ripple moving along the serpent's length. A breath. The mound exhales a low, nearly inaudible hum that trembles through our bones. The spirals glow faintly in the deepening dusk, and from the serpent's eye, a soft, deliberate sound rises. Not a hiss, not a whisper, a knock, familiar, ancient, echoing across every place we've walked. Once, twice, and in the silence that follows, the serpent of earth seems to listen, as though expecting something or someone to answer. Fortresses of the Celtic mists. The serpent's low tremor fades into the soil behind us, lingering like a final note vibrating through ancient ground. The land rises once more, though gently this time, a slow ascent toward a place where the air thickens, cool and pale. Mist gathers in drifting sheets, folding over the hills like gauze. Each step softens beneath our feet, as though the world is cushioning our arrival. And soon stone begins to appear through the veil, tall, angular silhouettes jutting from the earth in stoic, weathered lines. These are not cliffs, not natural outcrops. They are walls. Ruins of a fortress older than any story remembers, ringed by earthen embankments and carved with shallow depressions where towers once stood. Moss covers everything in muted greens and silver greys, draping the stones like ancient ceremonial robes. The fortress does not dominate the landscape. It inhabits it quietly, patiently, as if choosing to remain only partially seen. Locals call these ruins the Mist Keeps. They say the fortress does not guard the land guards the fortress, and the mist is its gatekeeper. A mainstream historical anchor guides us. Across the British Isles and Atlantic Europe, Iron Age peoples built hill forts, great earthworks, and stone walls rising from high plateaus. Many date between 700 and 100 BCE, used for defense, tribal centers, and ritual gatherings. But the mist keeps do not match typical layouts. Their foundations curl in odd, looping shapes. Their towers sit at angles that disregard strategic sightlines, and no ditch circles their perimeter. Instead, the earth mounds inward, as though protecting something held in the center, rather than repelling threats from outside. A fringe historian once described this fortress as a place built to keep something in, not to keep invaders out. Most dismissed her theory, yet villagers still whisper that the mists have a purpose. They appear suddenly when intruders draw too close, obscuring the ruins until the outsider loses direction and wanders back down the hill without knowing why. The first wall we reach is massive, its stones fitted so tightly that not even mist threads between them. Lichen forms spirals across its face. Spirals again, spirals everywhere we've walked. Here they are faint, etched only by centuries of slow growth, but unmistakable in their pattern. They loop inward like a beckoning gesture. The wind dies as we approach, thickening into a stillness that feels aware. We walk through what once was the fortress gate, 2 standing stones, each taller than a person, leaning inward ever so slightly. The villagers claim that at certain hours these stones hum, not always, not predictably, but when the air is damp enough to remember. Some have pressed their ears to the stones, hearing faint vibrations like distant drumming beneath the surface. One shepherd swore he heard footsteps walking deep inside the stone, rhythmic, determined, never pausing. When he jerked away in fear, his ear was cold, almost painfully so, as though the stone had breathed frost into his skin. Inside the ruins, the mist thickens. It moves with unnatural deliberation, coiling around collapsed structures, avoiding some areas, lingering near others. A peculiar effect occurs here. Sound collapses. Footsteps vanish beneath us. Breathing dulls. Even the rustling of our clothes seems swallowed by the air. It is as though the mist is listening. Not menacingly, attentively. Scholars still debate why the fortress walls curve inward rather than straight outward. Some propose early Celtic ritual enclosures. Others speculate astronomical alignment. But a rare manuscript from a medieval monk describes a strange practice among a forgotten tribe of the Western Isles. He wrote that some fortresses were built with inward teeth, designed to hold the wandering shade that carried memory too heavy for the body. Interpreters dismiss this as metaphor for ancestral worship. Villagers think differently. They say the fortress once held a spirit not evil, not vengeful, but powerful enough that the druids of the region agreed to bind it within stone. Whether the story speaks of a literal spirit or a symbolic burden, no one dares test the boundary. We move deeper. The central courtyard still holds its original shape. A ring of stones encircles a broad depression in the ground, the remains of a ritual pit or hearth. But unlike other ruins, no ash has ever been found here. No charcoal, no signs of flame. Instead, the pit is filled with mist that never disperses. Travelers say the mist in that pit is not moisture. It is memory, thickened, suspended, preserved. A wanderer once claimed he knelt near the pit and saw shapes inside the mist, outlines of figures walking slowly in circles, arms raised in reverence, heads bowed. Their forms were faint, almost imagined. Yet he swore one of them turned toward him, lifting a hand as if in warning. He fainted. When he awoke, the mist had withdrawn to the edges of the courtyard. The pit was clear, empty. As he fled the fortress, he felt something following him, not in steps, not in breath, but in a coldness that settled at the base of his spine. Another account speaks of a young woman who wandered into the ruins at dawn. Mist pooled thick around her ankles, curling in intricate shapes. She felt drawn toward the inner wall, where carved symbols hid beneath centuries of moss. When she brushed the moss aside, she uncovered a single line of script, ancient Celtic ogham, faint but legible, to bind what remembers. She pressed her fingers to the groove. The stone warmed instantly. A hum rose beneath her palm, soft, deep, almost comforting. Then came a second hum, from behind her. And when she turned, she saw a figure made only of mist, tall, indistinct, shaped like a warrior or a druid, standing motionless a few paces away. His head inclined slightly, as though acknowledging her discovery. She ran. She did not stop until the next village. As we noted earlier, each landscape we've crossed reflects memory in a different form. Here, the memory is contained, held, bound within stone and mist to keep it from wandering across the world. The fortress is not dead, it is fulfilling its purpose. We climb the inner rampart, or what remains of it. The stones here feel warmer than those below, as though the sun has touched them more directly. But when we place our hand upon one, the warmth pulses. A slow, steady rhythm. Not a heartbeat. A breath. The mist at the center gathers, thickens, rises. A figure begins to form, not solid, not shaped by flesh, but by memory held too long beneath earth and stone. It swirls upward, coalescing into the suggestion of broad shoulders, a cloaked form, a head crowned with something like antlers or twisted branches. The air tightens. The figure raises an arm. Mist peels away. A faint knock echoes through the fortress walls. Once, twice, then a soft, resonant whisper, as though something ancient, patient, and long contained has realized we have found the place built to hold it. Temples of the Incas' shadowed peaks. The mists of the Celtic fortresses drift behind us like slow-turning memories, and the land begins its long ascent toward thinner air. The hills sharpen, the soil turns rocky, and soon the world rises into a vast cordillera of jagged peaks, their summits dusted in pale frost, their flanks carved by ancient hands and older winds. The air here tastes cleaner, colder touched with a metallic sharpness, like the breath held at the edge of revelation. Steps appear before paths, narrow, steep, carved directly into stone. The Incas once built such stairways, rising into mountains that seemed unreachable to others. But these steps do not belong to any known city, kingdom, or empire. They predate them, and the villagers who guard this region insist the temples above were not built by the Inca, though the empire later found them and whispered their own cautions around the stones. They call this place the Shadowed Peaks, and the temples within them were, they believe, meant not for worship, but for listening to the mountains, to their heartbeats, to their dormant and dreaming spirits. A mainstream historical anchor steadies us here. The Inca Empire, flourishing in the 15th century CE, built sacred structures high atop mountains, most famously at Machu Picchu, aligned to cosmic events, solstice sunlight, and the living presence of the landscape. But archaeologists have also uncovered older, pre-Incan ruins woven into the Andes, mysterious sanctuaries with no known builders. Their walls lack the Incas' masterful stone-fitting precision. Their orientation follows less the sun and more something else. The temples we approach now belong to that older world. At the first landing, the mountains open around us like colossal guardians. Clouds drift below our feet, veiling lower valleys. Above, peaks rise in improbable angles, their faces etched with long seams that resemble scars rather than geological features. The first temple is small, hewn directly from a cliff wall. A narrow doorway leads into darkness. A faint hum vibrates from within, subtle, steady, pulsed like a quiet breath. Villagers warn travelers not to enter without offering coca leaves at the threshold, not as superstition, as courtesy. They say the mountains do not like to be surprised. We step inside, light narrowing behind us. The chamber is small but shaped with unsettling precision. Its walls slope inward, narrowing into a point where a single stone rests, an altar worn smooth by countless hands. Above it, a narrow slit in the ceiling channels a thin blade of sunlight directly onto the stone's center. But tonight, no sun shines through. Instead, pale, ambient light brushes the altar from below, as though emanating from the stone itself. A fringe detail emerges from a 19th century explorer who dared enter these temples. In his journals, he described the altars as listening stones, claiming they resonated under his fingertips, vibrating faintly in response to his heartbeat. He insisted the stones were alive in the way sleep is alive. His companions, frightened by his words, abandoned the expedition 2 days later. He remained behind. When they returned a month later, they found his pack intact, his journal dry, and the listening stones warm. He was gone. As we move deeper into the temple, another chamber opens taller, echoing slightly, though there is nothing for sound to bounce from. The air grows colder, the light dims, and then we hear it. A whisper, not breeze, not stone shifting. A whisper shaped like a word spoken from a great distance, filtered through layers of air and silence. It says nothing we understand, and yet it feels directed, as though sensing our arrival. Villagers tell of rituals once conducted here, rituals not of sacrifice, but of communion. They believe the ancient builders stood at the altars and listened for messages rising from deep within the mountain. Some claim the mountain's spirits once spoke clearly, instructing the people where to plant, when to watch the stars, when danger lay ahead. Others say the mountains warned them of something deeper, something waking beneath the Andean crust. A story persists of a great shaman who climbed these peaks during a season of violent storms. He returned pale, trembling, eyes unfocused. When pressed, he whispered only this: "The mountain asked me to remember its dream." He died the next morning. Scholars still debate whether tales like this reflect geological events, deep tremors, mistaken for voices, or cultural metaphors for the relationship between people and landscape. But here, in the shadowed peaks, the distinction blurs, because the mountains do not feel like stone. They feel awake. We step out from the first temple and ascend further along the ridge. The wind grows stronger, cutting across the narrow ledge with an eerie whistling pitch. It curves around the peaks, echoing in strange harmonic patterns. Some tones rise, some fall, some vibrate so low they feel more like sensation than sound. A second temple appears larger, wider, built on a flat outcrop. Its walls lean inward, forming a structure that resembles a listening ear. The floor slopes slightly, directing the weight of each footstep toward the center of the room. At its heart lies a circular depression filled with dark water, perfectly still, perfectly reflective. This pool, villagers claim, is the mountain's eye. One legend says that after dusk, the pool reveals what the mountain dreams, not visions, not prophecies, but memories of the earth, long before humans walked upon it. A boy once dared to touch the water during a full moon. He collapsed immediately, body stiff, eyes wide. When he awoke, he described seeing an immense shape coiled beneath the mountain's roots, a presence older than stone, moving in slow, deliberate cycles, as though turning in its sleep. He refused to speak of it after that. We kneel beside the pool. Its surface remains perfectly still. But beneath that stillness, something shifts, a pale shimmer, subtle, circular. A spiral, the same spiral carved in tombs, dunes, rivers, forests, pagodas, mounds. It glows faintly. The water trembles once, then stills. As we noted earlier, every landscape we've crossed remembers in its own language. Here, in the heights, memory sleeps deeply, dreaming in stone, rising only when disturbed. The third temple waits at the summit, a structure carved into the mountain's very crown. By the time we reach it, the wind has vanished. The air grows unnervingly warm, though snow glitters nearby. The entrance yawns open like a waiting mouth. Inside, the chamber is vast, far larger than the mountain could logically contain. Its ceiling rises out of sight. Columns stand in silent rows, carved with spirals that loop endlessly in dizzying patterns. A faint glow pulses between the columns. A heartbeat. The mountain's heartbeat. Then the sound comes. A low hum. Rising. Deepening. Resonating through stone, through air, through bone. It matches the knock beneath the ziggurat, the hum beneath the dunes, the breath in the forest, the chant in the pagodas, the pulse in the serpent mound, the whisper in the fortress. A single memory in many forms, connected, coiling toward one truth. A gust of warm air passes through the chamber. Not wind, breath. The mountain breathes. And then from deep within its core, a soft, deliberate echo rises. A voice not meant for ears. A voice meant for everything. It speaks one long, vibrating tone. And the entire chamber seems to lean toward us, as though expecting us to finally understand. Runes in the Viking fjord's depths. The shadowed peaks release us slowly, as though reluctant to loosen their dreaming grip. The mountain air thins, then warms, then grows damp with the faint scent of salt. We descend into a world where clouds hang low enough to brush the tops of dark pines, and the light takes on a silvery hue. The horizon narrows into steep cliffs carved by ancient ice, each one plunging into water so deep and dark it seems to hold entire nights within it. We have reached the fjords. Steep walls rise on either side, sheer and cold, veiled in thin curtains of mist. Waterfalls tumble down the rock faces in long, unbroken threads, their sound soft but constant, a whispering cadence shaped by centuries of falling. The fjord's surface is impossibly still, black-green, mirror-like, a vast, silent corridor leading inland. The villagers call this region the Drowned Carvings. They say runes sleep beneath these waters older than the Vikings, older even than the first settlers to carve boats from pine. The runes were not made to be read by human eyes, they say, but to bind something beneath the fjord's depths. And sometimes, when the wind stops and the water holds its breath, the runes rise to the surface in shimmering reflections, like a message begging not to be understood. A mainstream historical anchor steadies us. Viking. Age runestones, typically dated between 700 and 1100 CE, stand throughout Scandinavia. Many mark graves or memorials, while others proclaim power or voyages. Yet archaeologists have also found older carvings, proto-runes, scratched into cliffs and cave walls, dating back to the early Iron Age. Their meanings remain lost. This fjord, however, contains no carved cliffs, no stone circles, no standing stones. Only water. And beneath that water, something waits. The first strange detail reveals itself at the shoreline. Smooth stones cover the bank, each one darker than the last, like stepping stones into a deepening night. Some stones are carved shallow grooves, spirals, intersecting lines, but the carvings do not resemble Viking runes. They form flowing shapes, almost organic, like currents frozen into stone. A fringe detail comes from an 18th century sailor whose ship anchored here during a storm. He wrote in his log that the water beneath his hull glowed faintly at night, in looping patterns, long shapes curling around the boat. He believed them to be oversized eels until one pattern surfaced fully, revealing a perfect spiral that hovered for several seconds before dissolving into darkness. He left the fjord at dawn and never returned to this coast. As we move along the water's edge, the cliffs tower above us, like stone guardians. Their faces are smooth from centuries of ice and rain, yet faint vertical lines appear in certain places, not cracks, not erosion, deliberate markings, tall, narrow shapes resembling runes, but wrong somehow. Stretched, melted, as if carved when the rock was softer than it should have been. One villager tells a story passed down for generations. On the coldest night of winter, when the fjord freezes only at its edges, the deepest water hums, a long resonant note rising from far below. The note moves through the ice like breath, causing frost to crack in delicate spirals. The villagers call it the deep rune, believing it to be the voice of something ancient calling to the surface. Not in language, in vibration, and only those attuned to it can hear its meaning. A fisherman once claimed that while rowing across the fjord at dusk, he heard the water beneath him pulse soft thuds, evenly spaced, echoing like heartbeats transmitted through oars. He leaned over the edge, peering into the depthless dark. Something glowed below. Not a creature, not an object. A rune. A perfect vertical line, bisected by two shorter lines, a shape resembling an ancient binding symbol. It drifted upward until it nearly reached the surface. Then it tilted, as though turning to look at him, before sinking slowly back into the black. He dropped his oars and paddled with his hands until he reached the shore. We board a small wooden craft abandoned on the bank, pushing gently into the fjord. The water remains still, disturbed only by the quiet ripple of our passage. The deeper we travel, the more the air grows dense, not with moisture, but with atmosphere, pressure, as though the fjord is preparing itself for an encounter. Mist gathers along the water, forming low sheets that drift like pale ghosts. The cliffs narrow, darkness deepens, and soon we feel something beneath us, a slow, soft movement, not from current, not from wind. From below, a faint glow rises from the depths, illuminating the underside of our small boat with wavering green light. Patterns appear in the water looping shapes, interlocking lines. Runes, but not the runes carved by human hands. These move, shift, rearrange. They behave like something living. Scholars still debate whether such tales reflect underwater bioluminescence, refracted light, or hallucination brought on by isolation. Yet the patterns we see align too closely with the spirals and sigils we've encountered across the lands, from tombs to dunes, from rivers to pagodas, from serpent mounds to shadowed peaks. A single rune brightens beneath us. It looks almost like a door, a vertical line, a point of light, a curve looping around it. The water trembles. A low vibration spreads through the fjord, rising from the depths with slow, deliberate resonance. It matches the hum of the mountain, the chant in the pagoda, the knock in the ziggurat, the pulse beneath the serpent, the breath in the glacier. It is the same voice, the same memory, shaped differently, a presence older than all these places, speaking through each landscape in a different tongue. The light beneath us intensifies swirling runes, circling each other like stars forming constellations. Then, suddenly, they stop. All movement ceases. The glow tightens into a single, vertical streak, rising directly below the boat. It begins to ascend, slowly, very slowly. Then the water directly beneath us darkens unnaturally, as if something large is rising from unfathomable depth. The runes scatter in all directions like startled fish. The glow diffuses. The surface stills again, and from somewhere deep below, a knock echoes upward. Once, twice, then again. A third time. The fjord holds its breath. The cliffs lean inward, and something vast shifts in the darkness beneath our fragile boat, as though answering a call it has waited centuries to hear. Ziggurats of the Olmec enigmas. The fjords release us only after a long, trembling moment, as if the depths themselves needed time to decide whether to let us go. When they finally loosen their grip, the world lightens, warms, and gradually pulls itself into a different shape. The cliffs soften, pines give way to broad-leafed forests. The air grows thick with heat and the hum of unseen insects. Soon the land flattens into vast tropical lowlands, green, humid, fragrant with sap and distant rain. And rising from this steaming earth are forms unmistakable in silhouette, yet somehow older, rougher, more primal than their later descendants. Stepped pyramids, ziggurats. But not Mesopotamian, these are Mesoamerican, belonging to a culture older than the Maya, older than the Aztec, older even than most recorded memory in this hemisphere. The Olmec, or so scholars call them. The villagers, however, use another name, a name whispered only at dusk, when frogs begin their low chorus and the air glows amber. The builders of the shadow faces. The first ziggurat reveals itself through curtains of vines, a vast, tiered mound of stone, each level covered in moss thick enough to muffle footsteps. Its sides slope gently upward, but the edges remain sharply defined despite the centuries. The summit is obscured by a small canopy of trees, their roots gripping the stone as though refusing to let go. The air here feels charged, not with electricity, with memory. A mainstream historical anchor grounds us. Around 1,200, 400 BCE, the Olmec civilization flourished along the Gulf Coast of what is now Mexico. They carved colossal basalt heads, built ceremonial centers, and etched cryptic symbols into jade and stone. Yet many of their structures remain mysterious, especially those deep in forests, half swallowed by earth and vines. Their ziggurats predate much of Mesoamerica's monumental architecture. But even among Olmec scholars, this place is unfamiliar. There are no colossal heads here, no altars, only ziggurats and silence. A fringe account comes from a traveller in the early 20th century who claimed he found these ruins during a period of drought. He described the ziggurats as alive in posture, their steps angled just slightly forward, as if leaning toward the forest's edge. He slept one night at the base of the largest mound and awoke to the sensation that someone had stood over him while he slept. The prints around him were not human. Large, broad, toed like a jaguar's, but too symmetrical to belong to an animal. He fled before sunrise. As we approach the main stairway, the humidity intensifies. Cicadas fall silent. Even the breeze stops moving. The forest feels as though it is waiting not for us, but for something buried deep within itself to awaken. The steps are massive, each one carved from single blocks of darkened stone. Moss carpets them in velvety green. As we climb, the silence tightens around us like a woven cloth. At the first tier, the walls bear shallow carvings, spirals again, though styled differently than those we've seen before. These spiral lines are blockier, more geometric, yet their essence remains unmistakable. Some scholar once called them Olmec vortex glyphs, though their meaning was never deciphered. Villagers say these glyphs represent openings, not doors, openings in the world. The top of the first tier holds a platform large enough for a small gathering. A few broken stones lie scattered, carved with shapes that resemble jaguar faces, wide mouths, flared cheeks, round eyes. But these faces differ from typical Olmec iconography. They seem older, more primal, less symbolic, and more literal. The second tier brings a shift in atmosphere. The air cools suddenly, unnaturally, as though we've entered a different season entirely. Wind brushes past us, even though the trees below are still. A whisper follows it. Soft, cyclic, repeating in a slow, steady rhythm. Not language. A breath, echoing. An old villager once claimed that the ziggurats breathe through their stones at night. He said he felt the steps vibrate beneath his feet, pulsing with a slow rhythm, like the resting breath of a colossal being sleeping beneath the ruins. He vowed never to climb again. At the third tier, we discover a small opening in the stone, A square passageway descending into darkness. No light escapes. The air flowing from it is cold enough to raise gooseflesh. The villagers warn that this tunnel is one of the Shadowmouth's entrances, carved not for humans, but for beings of stone and spirit. Those who enter, they say, do not return to the world they left. Scholars still debate whether these tunnels extend into a larger subterranean complex, or if they simply collapse into natural caverns. No full excavation has ever been recorded. The forest reclaims every attempt. We avoid the tunnel for now. Higher. The summit draws near. The final tier opens into a broad, flat platform overlooking the entire forest canopy. The view is breathtaking. Endless waves of green stretching to the horizon, broken only by faint mist rising from hidden rivers. The air is strangely clear here, as though purified by altitude and intention. At the center of the platform stands a single monolith, tall, smooth, featureless, except for one detail. A deep groove carved down its center, a vertical line, perfectly straight, perfectly measured, flanked by two faint spirals. It resembles the rune that rose from the fjord. The sigil carved into the river stones. The symbol echoed in the glacier chambers. The same sign, across continents, across ages. Inside the monolith's groove, darkness gathers. Not shadow. Darkness, a depth so black it seems to swallow light. As we approach, the air vibrates subtly beneath our fingertips. Then the monolith breathes. A soft exhale of cold air emerges from the groove, followed by a sound, a knock. Once, twice, a third time. The same pattern that echoed beneath the ziggurat, beneath the dunes, beneath the glacier, beneath the serpent mound, beneath the mountain, beneath the fjord. A sound older than any ruin, older than any culture. A voice hidden in the world's oldest structures, speaking through stone, water, ice and earth. The monolith vibrates again, and a faint hum rises low, resonant, layered, alive. The forest below falls silent. The ziggurat seems to lean forward, and from the monolith's darkness, a pulse of cold air rushes outward, as though something inside it is beginning to wake. Spheres that bind the global veil. The Olmec monolith's cold breath retreats behind us as though inhaled back into stone, and the jungle warms again, wet, humid, pulsing with life. But something has changed. The world feels thinner now, as if all the places we've walked, dunes, fjords, tombs, rivers, forests, steppes, mountains, have exhaled into a single shared breath. The path ahead grows easier, almost strangely so, as if guiding us towards something that does not want to remain hidden any longer. Soon the trees open into a broad clearing, and there, at its heart, rests something that does not belong to any culture, any period, any geography. A sphere. Perfect. Smooth. Impossible. Not carved from stone, not exactly, but from a material that resembles polished basalt fused with obsidian, except for the faint, shimmering undertone that shifts like moonlight on oil. It is as large as a person, perfectly balanced, resting on a cradle of roots that have grown around it rather than beneath it. The villagers call it the binding sphere, but only in whispers. They say there is another sphere like it across the world, and another still, placed in deserts, jungles, tundras, islands, mountains, always hidden, always waiting. The sphere before us is the first we have seen with our own eyes. A mainstream archaeological anchor steadies us here. Costa Rica holds famous, perfectly carved stone spheres, dating as early as 600 CE, their purpose still unknown. Other spheres appear in Bosnia, Mexico, the Pacific Islands, some carved, some natural, some debated, but none match the intricacy of this one. Its surface is too flawless, its center of gravity too precise. its placement too intentional. And it hums. Softly, yes, but clearly. A slow, rhythmic vibration travels through the roots, up into the soil and into the air around us. The hum is not constant. It pulses, in patterns, in sequences. A researcher once mapped those pulses, claiming they resembled prime number intervals 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, repeating in ascending then descending order. She called it a message encoded in vibration, not sound. Her colleagues dismissed her work. They said her instruments malfunctioned. But villagers who live near this clearing tell older stories. They say the spheres were placed to hold the world together. Not physically, but in meaning. They bind something beneath the surface, something ancient that once moved freely through the world, speaking through mountains, rivers, dunes, oceans, forests, mounds, stone circles. And the spheres keep that presence from rising too close. The sphere before us shifts in the afternoon light, revealing faint markings etched into its surface spirals again, but so shallow they can only be seen when the sun glances off them at just the right angle. These spirals overlap, intersect, thread around each other like rivers in a map of forgotten constellations. Beneath our fingertips, the stone warms. Not with sunlight, with intent. A fringe detail emerges from a wandering anthropologist who visited decades ago. He claimed the sphere's warmth followed his hand as he moved, as if tracking him. He insisted he felt a heartbeat inside the stone, slow, powerful, ancient. Not the heartbeat of a living thing, he wrote, but of a memory that refuses to die. He vanished 1 month later while researching another sphere across the ocean. Villagers say the spheres are connected, not symbolically, but literally. They speak to each other. Vibrations sent through earth, water, bedrock, magnetic bands. They say if one sphere stirs, the others feel it. If one sings, the others listen. If one wakes, then all may wake. The clearing grows unnaturally quiet. Insects still, birds hushed, trees unmoving. Even the air seems suspended in anticipation. A single shaft of sunlight falls upon the sphere, illuminating a patch of spiral script near its crown. The spiral shifts. Not visually, physically. Stone sliding against stone with the softness of breath. A faint click, then a hum. Deep, resonant. The same pitch we heard beneath the ziggurat. The dunes, the glacier, the pagodas, the serpent mound, the mountain, the fjord, the Olmec monolith. All the same voice, all the same memory, shaped into different bodies across the world. Memory becomes breath, breath becomes vibration, vibration becomes signal. The sphere pulses once a tremor through our feet, twice a wave through the humid air. A third time, a soft, deliberate knock emerges from within the stone. The sound we have heard in every forgotten place. The sound that binds all these landscapes together. The global veil trembles unthreading slightly at its edge. The sphere's hum deepens. The spirals glow faintly. And from within the stone, as though traveling across continents, across ruins, across generations, a single whisper rises, asking something, calling something, or perhaps warning of something beginning to return. Conclusion. Night settles gently over the ancient paths we have followed, laying a soft hush across dunes, forests, fjords, temples, and every forgotten chamber where the world once whispered its oldest truths. Each landscape breathed its own memory, some in spirals, some in echoes, some in voices older than stone, until all those distant murmurs gathered into one steady rhythm. A rhythm that felt less like fear and more like recognition. Now, as the journey closes, the earth seems quieter, as though the very places we crossed have drifted back into sleep. The winds soften, the waters settle, the ruins hold their breath once more. And across the world's shadowed edges, those ancient presences watch without malice, guardians of stories long hidden, long protected. We step away with calm hearts, knowing the past never truly vanishes. It simply waits patient, enduring for those willing to listen.